Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening.
Good evening. Welcome to the Tuesday, December 2nd, 2008 meeting of the Glendale City Council. Mr. Kasakian, could you call the roll?
Council members Najarian.
Here.
Quintero. Here. Weaver.
Here.
Yusefian.
Here.
Mayor Draymond.
Here. And tonight, Councilmember Yusefian, you have the flag salute.
Yes, would you please stand up and face the flag with your hand on your heart and follow after me? I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for this evening's invocation. Tonight we pray for peace and pray that a world battered by the acts of terrorism in Mumbai, India can regain a semblance of normalcy as people touched by this horror piece their lives back together. The great Indian leader and global human rights advocate Mahatma Gandhi once said, "Strength does not come from physical capacity, it comes from an indomitable will." Although the individuals who carried out these terrorist acts and those who share their philosophy of destruction may think that they have made their point through destructive physical strength, as expressed in the form of terror upon the innocent, they are mistaken. The indomitable will of free people and people of hope and love will always conquer darkness and death perpetrated on people by other people. We pray to memorialize this creed that stands stronger than any act of violence and stands tall regardless of one's faith, be it Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, or Christian. We pray for peace and freedom from fear and terror tonight and always. Amen.
Okay, Mr. Kasakian, could we hear your report, please?
The agenda for the December 2nd, 2008 regular meeting of the Glendale City Council was posted on Wednesday, November 26, 2008 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. And our first item?
At 3 is presentation and appointments, and at 3A is agenda preview for the meeting of December 9th, 2008.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Let's go to Bob McFall, our Assistant City Manager, for the agenda preview.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. First to note, on all of the meetings next Tuesday, December 9th, there will be a business agenda for council to consider canceling the meetings on December 23rd and the 30th and holding over the meeting of January 6th to January 7th. So that will happen on the Housing Authority, the Redevelopment Agency, and the City Council. In addition, on the Glendale Redevelopment Agency, the Director of Administrative Services will be submitting the comprehensive annual financial report for the redevelopment agency. On the City Council, there will also be the city's annual comprehensive annual financial report. Additionally, the Director of Development Services will be submitting us a report regarding the Montrose Shopping Park Association budget for calendar year 2009. The Director of Planning will be submitting a report on the North Glendale Community Plan of the general plan. So it has several actions associated with it. The Director of Planning will also be submitting a report on the transfer of Board of Zoning appeal duties to the Planning Commission. And then lastly, actually that would be the last report. The final one would be the cancellation of meetings.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. McFall. Item 3B.
3B is a presentation by David Church.
Mr. Church, good to see you again.
Well, Mr. Mayor and members of the council and citizens of the Jewel City, I'm very pleased to be here. And Mr. Mayor, I could say, just as a follow-up to something that was mentioned earlier today, I can assure you definitively there is no person in Washington who thinks you've fallen out of the sky.
Thank goodness for that. And there's no person here either, so.
Every year the Congress is obligated and under law must conclude the federal budget and appropriations process not later than 12/01 on October the 1st. And for fiscal year 09, that 12/01 came at October the 1st in 2008. And this being the federal government, we hope to now conclude that activity by March the 6th. So correspondingly, I can say that many of your requests for fiscal year 09, which is well underway, are still underway and being considered. What we know is that so far, you do have a mark for $1 million in the Commerce, Science, and Technology, Commerce, Science, and what is that, Bill? Commerce, Justice, and Science Appropriations Bill, and it's for law enforcement technology. So you have a mark for $1 million, thanks to Congressman Schiff, for this community, and we expect that that will survive the process. We're also working on at least 3 other bills for possible appropriations for this community, but so far the Appropriations Committee has not filed reports on those bills. So we'll continue the work, we'll continue the effort. We don't know what will happen, and we'll see. Simultaneously, there's great talk about stimulus package in Washington, and no one knows, and I certainly don't know what that package may contain or what advantages there will be for this community. We're certainly watching the development of that bill very, very carefully. So if we do have opportunities, we want to be there. There's some sense that it may be a project-specific bill. That is, there'll be individual things like transportation or some other bills that you see that will mention specific projects. My guess is that's not going to be the case, and for 2 reasons. First of all, the vetting process requires too much time. And number 2, I think that the minority part of both the House and the Senate are fairly opposed to project-specific earmarks in that particular bill. So what we may see is we may see things come out by formula, and if it's CDBG grants or something, you'll be ahead anyway, and then you can use that however that might come down. I just don't have a good feel about that. What I do have a good feel about is the successor to Safety Lou. And again, this is the major piece of federal transportation legislation. It's a bill that covers all of federal expenditures for transportation for a 6-year period. Chairman Oberstar in the House and Chairwoman Boxer in the Senate have indicated that they intend to move this bill very, very rapidly. That is a project-specific bill. I'm going to see Chairman Oberstar Thursday evening of this week, so it's appropriate that I'm here tonight, and we'll talk. We've been talking a little bit about your requests, but I expect that bill could come out as early as February or March, and well ahead of schedule, unusual for the federal government, and I could expend a great deal of money. If we're talking about $600 billion for a stimulus bill, maybe a part of that $600 billion will actually be found in the transportation bill. Don't know how that's going to come down. I can tell you Washington is a very interesting place these days. We're forecasting great numbers of people, and I'm sure some members of this community who will come out for the inauguration. There was an article in the Post the other day, and they said if you can see the Capitol, if you're within 3 miles, walk, because there's no public transportation system that's going to be able to handle the number of people that are there. In any event, that's kind of the view of the evening, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Now, I should add one more thing. With me this evening, I'm pleased to say, is our Chief Operating Officer, who really runs the show, Marilyn Campbell, and she's here if there are difficult questions.
All right, so you brought backup with you. Okay. Mr. Weaver.
David, being familiar with Washington for a long, long time, and knowing this council meeting is being broadcast worldwide, just for warning, what do you see, how do you see this Congress operating more cohesively with some Republicans coming over to move an agenda ahead? Because it seemed like last year's there have been a lot of stalemating, inactivity, nothing moving. Do you see a greater move to get things done, as the President-elect has said?
Well, I think that'll certainly be true in the first, they always quote the 100 days and the 1,000 days and whatever, but I think the impetus is there. First of all, we, and particularly those of us that are in California, understand the dire straits that America is in at the moment. And I think correspondingly, we'll see politicians rise in Washington to move toward a solution to many of those problems, but with keeping in mind their own agendas and their own ideologies and what they believe is best for America. I think one observation, which is, I think, fairly accurate, you will see the House in particular move to the right. So it will be more centrist, more right-leaning than the last Congress, despite the fact that it has more Democrats. The Democrats were elected really because many moderate Republicans, the core of the moderate Republican caucus, essentially didn't run for office. My own congressman back in Virginia, Tom Davis, Jim Ramstad in Minnesota, to give you two examples. And they are replaced generally in what had been Republican districts with fairly conservative Democrats. They'll be socially liberal, but I think fiscally quite conservative and probably members of the Blue Dog Coalition. It'll strengthen that a little more centrist or right-leaning coalition of the Blue Dogs, and the same thing's happening with the Republicans then. The moderates have been fairly decimated. That party as well will be a little bit more rightward. But I think people will rise to the occasion. I have always been impressed with our nation's leaders, and for all the criticism, I have never encountered a group of people who work so hard and who think about what's best for citizens of this nation and work to achieve it. It's just sometimes they disagree with each other.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Quintero. All right, Mr. Najarian.
Thanks, David. Thanks for coming down. I know part of the reason for our past successes, aside from your great influence, part of our Glendale's past successes in front of Congress has been our willingness as council members to come down and meet face-to-face with the congressmen, the senators, the staff, etc. And I don't imagine that this year is any different. When do you think you'll need us to come down and advocate for the city?
We don't know that yet. What I can say is this will be an unusual Congress. They will be sworn in at noon on January the 6th. And historically, the Congress has then adjourned until the inauguration. This year, they intend to convene on the 6th and remain in session and work until inauguration. And a part of that will be the stimulus bill. We don't know yet how those bills are being put together. There's a great deal of conflict. I talked a little bit earlier about them being project-specific. We don't know if that's going to happen. If it's project-specific, we absolutely will ask for you to come. And I know the sacrifice that's involved in flying transcontinental back and forth, but it matters so much that you as elected representatives of this community show up. You put a face on those projects, and it's just, what you do is just invaluable. This is truly a team effort, and I thank you.
Keep us posted then.
All right, Councilmember Yusefian.
I just basically wanted to know when we need to come down, and I guess you answered that. I think it's important. I've been there several times, and I think it has been extremely valuable. We've been able to get millions of dollars because of that, and I think these are millions of dollars that our community pays in federal taxes, and so we try to get some of that back. We don't get all of it back, but we get some of that back that is spent on this city for the citizens and betterment of this community. So also I want to thank you once again for coming here and letting us know what is going on and what we need to do and keep us abreast of issues.
Well, if I'm not getting all of your tax dollars back, it's obvious my charge tonight is to redouble my efforts.
Very good, very good. Well, I want to thank you, David. I have noticed, gentlemen, however, that you are not as talkative and full of questions and comments as you usually are. I hope that's not a reflection on our relationship. So let me orchestrate off of Mr. Weaver's question. So given the new environment or a different environment in Washington, how do you see the city council functioning next year? Just kidding.
Mr. Mayor, I have another.
Yes, Mr. Wheeler.
When you were today, I heard on the radio that the governor was going back to meet with Governor-elect Obama, trying to request, what was it, $60-some billion in infrastructure projects that he said were ready to go. Have you heard any, it's probably too early, have you heard anything about how President-elect Obama might react to that with the Congress? I mean, is this coming with a stimulus program, or would it be separate?
I suspect that really comes with the acceleration of the successor to Safety Lou, the transportation legislation that I was talking about. And in part, this involves jurisdictional issues between committees of the Congress, and I think Mr. Oberstar is unwilling to give up road projects into a stimulus bill when they come directly under his jurisdiction. Now, it's one of the things I want to talk with him about on Thursday night, that is, will he then have a hand in writing the stimulus bill, and is he willing to entertain road projects essentially within his jurisdiction in the jurisdiction of a different committee? Might not. We don't know that yet. It's just difficult to vet projects for a stimulus bill and turn it out that fast when a stimulus bill probably comes under the jurisdiction of the Energy and Commerce Committee, maybe Ways and Means. But in any event, these are not committees that are geared up to be vetting projects that rapidly.
Well, other than the stimulus bill, I mean, if Obama agrees with the governor, you got these projects ready, I'll get you the money, what does he do? Can he just turn to Congress and say, I want you to consider appropriating the money in some bill or whatever right away?
Actually, that's exactly what he has to do, because President-elect Obama has no independent authority to spend $1 of federal money without the express authorization of the Congress. So all he can do is to go to the Congress and ask. However, it's the same party downtown as the same party uptown, and correspondingly, I think they'll cooperate fairly closely together, understanding that the Congress has moved to the right from the last Congress, probably more fiscally responsible, and I think that Republican votes are going to be needed, so there are going to have to be compromises in these bills as they come down. We'll see to what extent that happens.
Thank you, David. We certainly appreciate it. Mr. Yusefian?
A question on the issue of energy independence and so on and so forth. Do you anticipate in any of these bills to be some sort of stimulant package or any kind of a bill that will move forward the vision of President-elect on a green type of energy? Do you see anything in the horizon that will come off that?
Well, there's certainly a great groundswell in America to energy independence and the greening of America generally. We're far more conscious of our energy dependence than we were, say, 2 years ago, as a for instance. I think that there are two things that are likely to happen very rapidly. If Oberstar is correct in his assessment that he wants to move the transportation bill very quickly, that's a major piece of legislation. Last time out, it was $250 billion. Mr. Oberstar and Mr. Young had asked for $350 billion. That could easily be a $500 billion request this year, maybe even more. And the other bill would be the stimulus bill. But the stimulus bill, to be effective, can't really be looking ahead to 3 and 4 and 5 years for the development of technologies. It's money that somehow has to be pumped into the economy today. So to do that, the rule has been, if it's not shelf ready, if you don't have a project that can be that contracts cannot be let, and now it varies 90 days, 120 days, but something in that parameter, then it doesn't qualify as stimulus and it should be somewhere else.
And follow up on that, let me give you an example. Solar technology is on the shelf. It's happening. We install them in a lot of our municipal buildings. would government be interested in giving grants to municipalities that then later on will use to give to the public who are willing to install solar panels and so on and so forth? I mean, that is something that you can get going, hence creating a demand for those type of jobs, creating the 2.5 million jobs that President-elect is talking about in green technologies.
Well, I think he's indicated that he's very interested in creating those technologies and those kinds of jobs. Whether it can be done in the stimulus bill, that's basically then going to involve formula a distribution of the nation's assets, I don't know. I mean, we just don't know how that bill's going to be written yet. It's being discussed, compromises are being reached, we just don't know. I wish I had a better answer. But then my answer so often to your questions is, I don't know.
That's because you really don't know.
That's true.
Thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions or comments for Mr. Church?
When are you going back to Washington?
Wow.
Have a good dinner somewhere tonight in Glendale.
Thank you very much. Count on it.
Go visit our new Americana who has opened.
I saw the lights. I saw the lights.
See the light.
You see the light, huh?
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you, David. All right. Mr. Kasakian, can we move on to the next item, please?
Certainly. F4 City Council and staff comments.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Weaver, anything?
Just the one reminder again, we start decorating the float this Sunday, 9 a.m. A number of people have sent in their forms by way of our website. Schools have all responded. If you still want to work, you can always send in to the GlendaleRoseFloat.com. The forms are on there, whether you're a student or adult. Students get community service hours, and adults don't. We've additionally tapped into the LA Unified School District to come help our float too. So our float may be another one depending on how many volunteers. So if you want to try something different, unique, this Sunday starting at 9 a.m. and then the following 2 Saturdays after Christmas every day from 8 in the morning to 11 at night till we get it done. Hope you'll decide to send your children down or adults come down. I'll find something for you to do.
Okay, Mr. Weaver, thank you. Mr. Quintero? Mr. Najarian?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I need to let everyone know, before you hear it from other sources, on Thursday in Glendale, I ran into Superintendent Escalante, who got right up next to me and started dishing it out. And you know, I'm not one to shy from a challenge, and I got right back next to him and started dishing it out my end. At the end, we ended up dishing out 300 Thanksgiving dinners at the Salvation Army. He was dishing out the green beans, I was dishing out the mashed potatoes, and it was a great effort. They talk about city, school district cooperation, and none of my potatoes ended up on him, and none of his green beans ended up on me. It was really a joy to see the Salvation Army and all the volunteers work so hard at serving really delicious Thanksgiving dinners to those who are less fortunate. Congratulations to the Hilton, to Marie Callender's, and to all the scores of volunteers. My 2 young boys also were there with a little bit of encouragement from me. So it was a very great event, thanks to the new captain, Rio Ray, who you saw last week or 2 weeks ago. We lost that challenge, by the way, to the school district on the collecting of funds, so we're going to try again next year. The other item is a little more serious. I just want to remind everybody that 20 years ago, December 7th, 1988, Armenia was hit by a terrible earthquake. The estimates at the loss of life were upwards of 50,000 people. 3 cities were mainly hit, Spidak, Kirovakan, and Leninakan. It was really a terrible earthquake during the times when the Soviet Union was still a viable entity, and Mikhail Gorbachev was the premier at that time, and it was a very unusual occurrence where they permitted aid from the United States to come in beyond the Iron Curtain. I know that firsthand. My dad was one of the first picked by the State Department to go into Armenia to assess the just the terrible conditions. Villages were just flattened. Dead bodies were just everywhere. Children with limbs lost. Just terrible, and it was a real dark period of time for the yet to be born Armenian Republic, independent Armenian Republic. But they did pull through that, gained their independence a few years afterwards, and now hopefully are back on their feet. So it was 20 years ago from this Saturday, a huge earthquake hit the then Soviet Republic of Armenia, and just something to think back on and realize maybe how fortunate we are in the United States to have escaped such a similar calamity as they have.
Thank you, Councilmember Najarian. Councilmember Yusefian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Several items. First of all, I'd like to invite the citizenry of Glendale tomorrow at 7 p.m. To come down to Perkins Plaza, and we will be lighting the Christmas tree. And I am sorry to tell you there will be no fireworks, so it's a leg down. But nevertheless, there will be hot chocolate, a lot of hot chocolate. So I think you will enjoy it. It's not as big as 100 feet tall, but I think you will see it's bigger than your own tree. We do a very good job at it. And from what I understand is most of us in City Council will be there and will be singing, so make sure you bring your earplugs, okay? We don't guarantee anything for any injuries or any of that kind. So that's one thing. Don't forget, tomorrow at 7 p.m. at Perkins Plaza. The second item is this weekend, actually, I think it was Monday it was Sunday. CNN every year has a program called the Heroes program. This is a program that CNN puts together with many other organizations and pick 10 individuals for their heroic acts in this country. Over 4,000 applications were submitted. 10 were picked. Among judges was Reverend Desmond Tutu was one of the judges. So as I'm watching that, and hate to tell you, your council member was crying like crazy because when you see some of the people who have basically nothing, and one of them happened to be just a nanny that spends all her money to go down to Mexico and build a center for children who have cancer. And she gets other nannies who donate $10 a month, whatever they can spare, to basically run that center on her own. With the exception of food and shelter, she put everything else she had in that place. It's unbelievable, some of the people who did the stuff that they did. As I was telling Mr. Zern, one of them happened to be a contractor. And as I'm watching TV programs, I'm always thinking about Glendale and what we can get out of it. One of the contractors who was hired by the federal government during the Katrina, after was finished working on Katrina, decided that he needed to help other people. So this contractor took his equipment, which included 2 dump trucks, one of those cranes that picks up stuff to clear the place. It had a pump. It had all kinds of gadgets, generators, and also hovercraft. And he put it all together in 2 semi-trucks. They became a strike team. Him and 3 of his buddies worked for free, no charge. He paid for all the equipment, which was $1 million, and all these 4 guys do is sit home and watch the Weather Channel on television. And the minute they get a notion that anywhere in this country there's a problem, they get those trucks on a railroad truck and they get over there, and they're the first ones on site to clear the roads, to help the neighbors, to pump all the water, to do the rescue. Before their city agencies show up, before their federal agencies show up, and they did it for free. They've been doing this for 4 years. I just couldn't believe it. So first thing that came to my mind is, gee, Steve, we have a lot of those equipment. Have we thought about putting a strike team ourselves and putting it in different parts of the town? The other thing during that program that came across was Procter & Gamble, and I hope GWP people paying attention to this. Procter & Gamble has made a chemical. It looks like sugar substance type of a thing. It looks like it. They take a brackish water, and apparently more people die out of insanitary water than AIDS and malaria combined. I didn't know that, so I learned something new. They showed a brackish water. I mean, it was green and filthy, and you go, I'm not going to drink this. They put this little packet in there, and within few minutes, it was crystal clear, and it became drinking water. And what they were saying is, for $1 of this material, it would generate enough water for 50 days. So my thing was, since GWP send out all those little fluorescent bulbs and so on and so forth, I think for earthquake preparedness, it may not be a bad idea to look into Procter & Gamble and see what those packages cost, and to send that in our water bills to the public so they have them at home. Because in case of a major earthquake disaster, what is the first thing our fire chief and everybody says? Don't drink the water because it may be contaminated. This may be one way of solving that problem. It's very inexpensive and apparently solves the problem of water. So while I was watching the program and I was crying, I came up with 2 items that I think we may be able to use for our own city. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Well, washing and watching and crying and purifying water.
What do you want?
I'm telling you. It was a busy night.
It was a
at the
busy
recipient
night.
household.
It was a busy night.
All right. I only have one announcement, folks, and that is just a reminder that I was contacted and asked to remind you that this Saturday, December 6th, at 6:15 p.m. is the 32nd annual Montrose Glendale Christmas Parade. Up in Montrose from Rosemont Avenue down to Verdugo Road. And usually they have about 20 to 30,000 people lining the parade route. Believe it or not, this is the first time in I don't know how many years that all 5 of your council members will actually be in the parade this year. So we'll all be in one spot at the same time, other than on a Tuesday. How about that? And it's free to the public. There are all kinds of activities also going on in the shopping park, ongoing. There are free pony rides on Saturdays, live Christmas music throughout the shopping park, both classical guitar, classical harp, and live Christmas jazz throughout the shopping park, as well as horse-drawn trolley rides, which are all free to the public Saturdays and Sundays, and then the Sunday Old Town Christmas Market on Sundays from 9 a.m. till 2 p.m. But in particular, this Saturday, December 2nd, is the 32nd annual Montrose Glendale Christmas Parade. We encourage you to come on out. If it's like usual, you'll need to bring a blanket and something warm and enjoy all the festivities. It's a lot of fun. And this year's Grand Marshal is our one and only Los Angeles County Superintendent Mike Antonovich. Supervisor, pardon me, Mike Antonovich. Okay.
It's not going to rain.
And it's not going to rain. All right. Thank Thank you so much. Mr. Kasakian, the next item.
Next item is consent items, including minutes following are routine and may be acted upon by one motion. A member of council or the audience requesting separate consideration may do so by making such request before a motion is proposed, and I believe there is a card submitted for 5C.
Yes, we have two items to pull. Request to pull item 5B like boy and 5C like cat. Do we have a motion to, on the others?
So moved.
All right.
Second.
Any debate on those?
You have to abstain.
He came in late. Who was there?
All right. In that case, Mr. Kasakian, let's call the roll.
Council members Najarian?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Yusefian?
Aye.
Mayor Draymond?
Yes. Mr. Kasakian, could we hear the item at 5B?
5B is General Manager of Glendale Water and Power regarding contract to provide security guard services at the Perkins Building. At B1 is motion authorizing City Manager to execute a contract with Securitas Security Services USA for 5 years.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Yusefian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The reason I pulled this item is because this is an item that is requesting a 5-year contract for security. The issue isn't the security, it's $342,000. And I would like to know, why are we doing this 5 years, considering the fact later on we're going to talk about our budget issue. I don't want to have a contract that binds this council and future council for the next 5 years to something. If we need to cut to save police officers or whatever later down the road, we're not going to be able to do it. And I understand this is GWP money, but in my mind, all the money is one money, because things get transferred from one account to the other, and if you don't have it there, we're going to have an issue.
All right, let's see if we can get you an answer. Mr. City Manager.
And in that, maybe getting to through this more quickly, is there a termination clause in the contract, and what is it?
30-day.
30-day. So this really guarantees a price to us for 5 years, but there's a 30-day termination clause, so if we wanted to get out, we give 30 days notice and we're out of the contract.
And when was this contract negotiated?
I'm sorry, the existing contract?
When was this negotiated?
The existing contract is about to end now. It's been in service for 3 years, the past 3 years.
He means the proposed contract. These were bids.
The proposed contract is not in place yet.
When did we get the bids? When did we ask them to
We got
give
the
us
bids
the
on September, I believe it's in here, September 17th.
of this year?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right before the meltdown.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you please state your name just for the record?
Kevin Todd.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay, thank you very much.
thank you.
All right. Is there any other comment on this item?
Do you have any cards?
Not on this item.
Move 5B1, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Motion and a second. Mr. Kasaki.
Council members Najarian?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Yusefian? Mayor Draymond?
Yes. Could we hear the item at 5C, please?
5C is General Manager of Glendale Water and Power regarding proposals received for inspection and overhaul of the Grayson Power Plant Unit Number 8A generator. At C1 is a motion awarding a contract to Wood Group Generator Services, Inc. for a total amount of $633,735 plus a 20% contingency, and rejecting all other proposals.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kasaki. And Mr. Milano.
Mayor Draymond, members of the City Council, my name is Herbert Milano. I'm addressing this particular consent item because oftentimes the discussions that are generally made concerning capital improvements are made usually during the day at a time when the general public doesn't get a chance to see this information. Very few people get to see those discussions. And eventually these funds or requests for funds or the approval of these contracts come before this council. And for those of us who do take a look at the infrastructure, especially the Glendale Water and Power infrastructure for electric, I remember seeing that many of these power units were built in the 1940s, others were built in the 1950s, others in the 1960s. And upon further inquiry, I found out that the average life of many of these power units is 27 years. Which means that many of these units that are being refurbished on a continual basis are really units that are technologically obsolete. What many people don't know is that even though the charter of the City of Glendale allows the City Council to transfer a significant amount of money from the Department of Water and Power, it must do so judiciously, and at least it allows the council to basically come back and look to see if it is a judicious transfer, meaning that you're taking care of the infrastructure needs. It is my contention that for many, many years, the transfers that were made out of the Glendale Water and Power to the general fund did not allow for the proper maintenance of all of these units, which in turn has caused the city earlier this year to approve a bond measure, the issuance of bonds, to basically allow for the proper maintenance and the capital improvements that were needed. I would like to find out if this particular $633,000 is coming out of those proceeds. I know it's from the electric bond issue. And also, it would be nice for the public to know what is the real status of all the other units, because it's about the only time when we can really be apprised of the real state of the capital, of the assets that are so critical to the maintenance of the utility here in Glendale. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milano. All right. Is there any other discussion on this item?
Response.
I'm talking about from the council. Nothing? Mr. Staggert?
Depends on his answer.
On his answer, okay. You heard the challenge, Mr. Staggert.
Yes, I did. Mayor Draymond, members of the council, I would like to address some of those comments, and I think overall, there's no question that a number of our generating units are older units, well-maintained, however, and have served a very, very vital purpose here in Glendale. And I think this is an appropriate time to mention that 2 weeks ago, Glendale was on the edge of not having any power during the fires that occurred in Sylmar. The Sylmar fires took out most of the transmission access that we have for importing power into Glendale during that Saturday and Sunday period. If it was not for the units that we have at Grayson, all of them well-maintained and with the ability to bring up very quickly to get them online, we would have had to drop load here in Glendale. That is not a possibility. That would have been an actuality. That would have happened. So it's critical that we maintain these units. No question that the older ones are older technology. They serve a purpose. They're used for peaking, and they're used for providing what's known as ancillary services, which are voltage support and some other things that go along with providing the proper level of power here in Glendale. So we believe strongly that the maintenance of these units is critical to the reliability, which has improved over the last few years, and will continue to be. Will we continue to rebuild units built in 1941 forever? No, not at all. In fact, we're reaching a point where some of those may have to be retired. This is not one of those, though. This is a newer unit. This one needs to be overhauled. This is a typical overhaul. It's due for it, and the funding has been budgeted for this year. Comes out of GWP funds, and so I highly recommend that we do this overhaul.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Steiger. Mr. Weaver.
Steiger, during the budget study sessions that we have, don't you always, or your predecessors, give us the status of the power plant, the different units and what they're doing and what you're recommending currently?
Yes,
So the public does hear this if they watch the budget study sessions?
Yes, and in fact, at the GWP Commission, we give updates every 3 months on our power supply situation, which includes the status of the Grayson units.
Okay, so this isn't the only time of the year that you hear about it?
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver.
Mr. Mayor, I might also
Mr.
point out
City
that as we contemplated the utilization of bonds to invest in infrastructure, you spent considerable time going through both the water and the electrical capital improvement programs, which were very detailed, delineated every capital improvement anticipated with those funds,
Okay, thank you.
of which this was one.
Mr. Najarian.
You used a technical term. You said that during those fires, were it not for those generators, we would have had to drop load.
Correct.
So what does that mean?
That means turn the lights out.
Okay.
As it turned out, LA actually did have rotating blackouts during the fire. We came close, but since we had the Grayson units come on, we did not have to do that.
Mr. Mr. Yusefian, anything?
No, actually, I'm familiar with the unit. It was built actually in the 70s.
Correct.
And this is the one that we put considerable amount of money in 2001 when the deregulation was going through. And we had some issues with ammonia. We took care of that, and so it's doing fine. It just needs to be serviced every so often.
Correct. There's a number of starts and a number of hours of operation which dictate that you have to do it.
But I think Mr. Milano, to an extent, is correct that at one point, as you said it, some of these units have been around since 1940s. They're not going to last forever. While the generator may last, you rework it, rewound it, but the actual boiler system and all that stuff, you just may have to replace them. And we have looked in the past at having 225 megs instead of 250 that Magnolia has. And I guess you're going to bring that up at one point?
We will.
What the cost of that thing is?
We will. In fact, we're starting a study right now.
Let's not wait until they're completely out before we get in there.
All right. Mr. Quintero.
I just want to talk about a trip I took. That's it, Mr. I just want to talk about a trip I took with the Metropolitan Water District years ago. Took us all the way up the route to Colorado, right to the dam. And I will never forget how surprised I was while touring that dam, there were 4 generators. 3 of them were the originals when that dam was built in the 30s. However, one of them had been replaced twice. So when that original went out, they had to replace the existing generator twice. So that gave you an idea about the quality of what was done when that dam was built and some of the replacements. Anyway, old doesn't always necessarily mean that it's inferior or anything else. It can work just as well as when it was first designed.
Amen.
All right.
Those of you who are into, well, I don't mean humans there, Mr. Starbird. I'm talking in terms of engines. Including General Motors. That's gotten the Chevy V8 is still the best V8 ever designed by man.
All right. What about by non-human designers? All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Steiger.
If you want to talk about 40s, I was here in the 40s, and another couple decades or so, I'm going to get replaced too.
Well, but then we'll have to replace you a couple more times after that, according to Mr. Quintero's theory. So.
Yes.
All right. Mr. Kasakian, let's call the roll on item 5C.
Council members, no, there was not a motion. Or second.
That would help, wouldn't it?
5C1, I'll second it.
All right. We have a motion and a second.
Council members Najarian.
Yes.
Quintero.
Yes.
Weaver.
Aye.
Yusefian.
Aye.
Mayor Draymond.
Yes. The next item.
Next is oral communication.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, we take oral communications at the end of the agendized items, except for those speakers who volunteer to limit their time to 3 minutes for the purpose of making public announcements. And I have one speaker card, and that is Mr. Edward Havens from Mann Theaters.
Mr. Mayor, member of councils, good evening. My name is Edward Havens, and I'm here tonight to inform the residents of this great city of our coat drive for the disabled veterans charities, which will be held at both Mann Theaters, the Exchange and the Marketplace, in conjunction with the opening of Valkyrie on December 26th. In brief, the mission of the Disabled Veterans Charities is to rehabilitate and support disabled homeless veterans, their widows, and dependents. We'd like to encourage all of Glendale to participate and dig deep into their closets for those coats that are no longer in use. We'll have stations set up at each theater in the lobby for everyone to drop off these much-needed donations. We'll be accepting the donations for the month of December and throughout the new year. And we all at Mann Theaters are looking forward to a very successful drive, and we ask everyone to please take their time to donate for this wonderful cause. Their work is never done. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much, Mr. Havens. That was the only card for this portion of oral communications. Let's move on to the next item.
Item number 8 is, first item is Director of Development Services regarding consideration of resolution of intention to levy and collect assessment in the Adams Square Business Improvement District, BID, through 2009. At 8A1 is the resolution of intention to levy and collect assessments. At 8B is Director of Development Services regarding Adams Square Merchants Association budgets for the calendar year 2009. 8B1 is a motion accepting Adams Square Merchants Association annual budget, and 8B must be adopted before 8A can be.
Okay. Yes, that was That's one little change we need to be careful of there. We don't have any speaker cards on this, but I would like to ask Mr. Lansdowne or someone from your department if you could just sort of give us a quick overview on this and perhaps introduce the representative from Adams Square PID.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. Annually, we come before you to present the upcoming year's budget or their annual report for your approval.
Tell us who you are.
I'm sorry, I'm Jackie Bartlow from Development Services. And also request that you consider a resolution of intent to levy the assessments for the upcoming year. Today we have here Alfred Ramirez. He's the treasurer for the Adams Square Business Improvement District, and he'll give you a report.
Very good. Thank you for coming.
Good evening, Mayor and council members and citizens of Glendale. My name is Alfred Ramirez. I'm the treasurer for Adams Square Merchants Association, day job as Associate Dean for Glendale Community College. We're here to present the budget for you for this year. It's hopefully a modest budget given the items that we've been talking about, $300,000, $600,000. But we dutifully do request your continued support for Adams Square, which is doing very well and trying to maintain some type of integrity and build the neighborhood scene that Glendale is very famous for.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramirez. How is it going, retail-wise and service-wise?
Retail-wise, it's a little bit slow because of the economy. I think we're trying to rebuild. We had a few vendors come and go. As you can see, we have some delinquencies and vacancies in our collection, but otherwise we're doing well and trying to gather more support for active participation from all the vendors.
Very good. Thank you for your efforts. Let me see if my colleagues have any questions or comments. Mr. Yusefian.
I understand you have an event coming up this Saturday?
Thank you for asking. We do have an event, and I was looking at the time frame.
2 to 5?
2 to 5. We're going to have Christmas Carnival at the block of Park Avenue and Adams Street. We'll be there from, actually Santa Claus will be there from 2 to 5, and we're hoping that all the council members can make it there, and Mr. Mayor, of course, and you'll make it in plenty of time to the Christmas parade in Montrose, which starts at 6:15, by the way.
So you have to give enough time for Santa Claus to get from there to there. Yeah.
Right, so Santa Claus will make it for all those watching.
There's only one, Mr. Mayor.
That's right. Santa Claus will make it from Adams Square to Montrose and to all the kids on the 24th. So we hope to see you all there. We have kiddie rides, bouncer, free cookies, cider, and I believe there will be music now.
Very good. Well, thank you for all the good work you do down there. Are there any other comments or questions from Mr. Ramirez? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
May I move 8B1?
Second.
Well, I think that was the most unanimous second I've ever heard on this dais. Very good. Let's call the roll.
Council members Najarian?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Yusefian?
Aye.
Mayor Draymond?
Yes.
8A1, please.
We have a motion on 8A1 and a second. Mr. Kasaki.
Council members Najarian?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Yusefian?
Aye.
Mayor Draymond?
Yes. Okay. The next item, please.
At 8C's Director of Administrative Services, Finance regarding first quarter financial update and adjustments to the adopted 2008-2009 budget. C1 is a resolution of appropriation amending the adopted 2008-2009 budget.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kasakian. Mr. City Manager.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, some brief prefatory comments, then I'll turn to Mr. Bob Elliott, who I think with support from Michelle Flynn, Budget Administrator, will go through this first quarterly financial update, which in times past has been a bit of a sleeper, only because there generally isn't much to report at the end of the first quarter about the city's finances. This year, however, is shaping up to be something unlike any year that we've faced in a long, long time. You'd have to be living in a cave to not know the significance of what's happening with the economy throughout the United States, and that is having, of course, an anticipated trickle-down effect on budgets of states, counties, and local cities and special districts. This evening, we're going to vary a bit from the traditional first quarterly update, which really was focused on adjustments to the annual budget that weren't picked up in the initial budget you adopted. We're going to do that, but that is a relatively minor part of the presentation this evening, and instead turn to a first blush assessment of the potential implications of the current economic situation on the city's anticipated revenues for this fiscal year. Now, you're going to see at the end of the presentation a projected gap between anticipated revenues that we estimated in the original budget that you adopted and where we think we'll be at the end of this year. That's only half of the picture, because the other half of that picture then is a report that we bring you right after the first part of the calendar year, which is a number of alternatives and strategies for ensuring that the city's budget remains balanced. It's going to be a difficult year, but I assure you from the beginning of the fiscal year, even before the current economic situation unfolded before us, we were calling this the year of the budget, because, as you recall, we made considerable adjustments to reduce costs to maintain a balanced budget going into this year, including the elimination of 42 full-time positions in the general fund and reduction in costs of over $5.5 million to close a projected gap back in July of almost $8 million. We are now facing, as Bob will describe, considerable additional pressures on our revenues, and we, your staff and the management team, are continuing to focus a great deal on ways in which to reduce costs and develop strategies so that after the first of the year we can put measures into place that will ensure that Glendale's budget remains balanced. It's going to be a considerable effort, not without a great deal of angst, I believe, but unlike the federal government, we can't print money. We have a charge by our charter to maintain a balanced budget, and I have an obligation to bring you one and ensure that it remains balanced, and we're committed to doing that. With that, let me turn to Bob Elliott, who will take you through this rather unusual first quarter financial update. Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Starbird. Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, we're bringing you a hopefully an in-depth look at the first quarter. Before we get started, I wanted to say special thanks to Michelle Flynn and Audrey Asayan for all their hard work on this. Thank you. Where are we?
Excuse me, Mr. Elliott, one moment. Mr. Yusefian.
It says first quarter financial update. Could you tell me it includes what?
Primary focus.
The numbers that we're looking at, it's from when to when?
July 1st through September 30th.
Thank you. Of 2008.
Correct.
But if I can, this is where we've gone a step further than normal quarterly update. Usually we tell you what we've experienced the first quarter and whether there's any significant adjustments. We've gone beyond that to really spend a great deal of time trying to anticipate for the entire fiscal year where we think, with given what we know now and what we can best estimate will happen over the ensuing fiscal year, where we think our revenues will be this fiscal year, so that rather than just reacting to the first 3 months, then waiting for the next 3 months to unfold the next 3 months, because a great deal of this picture really won't unfold until we're through the entire holiday season. We've tried to do a lot of estimating as to where we believe we'll be with what we know now and what we can best project for the future, the impact on our revenues for this fiscal year.
So it's not based on the actuals that we have received as of 9/30/08?
In part, it is. I mean, that's the only information we currently have. Okay. But frankly, we've also gone out and gathered anecdotal information. We've also looked at trends throughout the state and the county, and we've tried to draw, I won't say a worst case, we've tried to be pretty conservative in our estimates as to what is likely to occur. As I heard recently a quote from the new head of the National Economic Council, it's easier to correct an overestimation than to correct an underestimation. So we are trying to be very conservative in hopes that the adjustments we'll make throughout the remaining 6 and 7 months of this fiscal year will ensure that we'll have a balanced budget.
Okay. Mr. Elliott, it's yours, and we won't be interrupting you, so you can finish your presentation.
Feel free. Where are we on revenues? And this is focusing primarily on the general fund. As of September 30th, we are around 13%. Expenditures are tracking about 23-24%. And expenditures typically are more straight line, i.e., at 3 months in, you'd expect to be about 25%. Revenues, however, are skewed throughout the year, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. But we do get sales tax every month. Property tax, however, is skewed, and we get 2 large payments twice a year. So this is about where we'd expect. It is down, obviously, from where we were a year ago, and that's primarily due to sales tax. Just to recap, what we wanted to do is show everyone where we were originally during last year's budget, how we got here. There was original submitted budget that had quite a bit of a gap to it, and there was a lot of efforts on all the departments for reductions and some revenue increases to get us to that bottom line, which you see is the adopted budget at $168 million in the general fund. That was adopted back in June. Obviously, the economy, and everybody, you hear it every day on the radio of all the issues that are occurring in the economy, and with that, we've tried to take a hard look at our revenue streams and have offered these revised projections. Obviously, the biggest one is sales tax reduction, and that is primarily for the reduction in the automobile sales that we are experiencing. Car sales are about 1/5 of our sales tax, and we have reduced that down, and that's primarily based off input we've gotten from some of the Car Dealers Association, which has told us they're down about 25%. However, if you listen to the national news, I think the average for the big three, they're down 40%. Even the big three Japanese makers are down 25%. So we're reducing it down quite a bit, but that could go even further as the year goes on. Other reductions, licenses and permits, that's primarily building permits that have been hit with reduction in construction activity. Charges for services, there's some reductions from booking fees and some other items that have not materialized, so we've reduced those down. So bottom line is we've reduced our revenue estimates by $8.1 million. As I said earlier, some of our revenue sources are come in at different times during the year. Our first property tax payment is due in a few weeks, so we have yet to see what that is. We aren't expecting any surprises there, however. In terms of sales tax, just a reminder, there's quite a bit of gap from when the activity actually occurs from when we know what it is, and that's primarily for the state to process the information. Just as a note, the Christmas quarter, which is October, November, December, represents almost 1/3 of our annual sales tax, so it's very important we'll know what that is, and we won't know what that is until April. Just to recap, our expenditures in the general fund are about 23-24%, which is pretty good. We stated in the report and gave a recap of all the different departments. The fire department is higher than what we'd expect, but that was due to the strike team activity and all the additional costs, and those will be revenue offset when we get those billed, and we'll come back with those at a separate time. There is one additional request in the general fund, and it is revenue offset, and that's to purchase an office trailer for the fire department, and it will actually generate some savings because it's being rented as currently. So where does that leave us? Our original revenue estimate was $168 million. We've taken out our revised revenue projections, reduction of $8 million to give us put us back at about $160 million, and then adding in the $20,000 that would be reimbursable gets us back at $160 million. Wanted to spend a few minutes just to highlight some of the things that we mentioned in the report on the adjustments that are requested from the other funds. Primarily in the special revenue funds, one of the adjustments was for red light traffic enforcements for the police department for about $300,000, and some other items that we had a big effort to clean up a lot of police and fire grants, so those adjustments reflect those items. In the capital improvement fund, there was a request for a police mounted video system, and as you recall, when the CIS CSI software was done, we actually advanced some money out of the fund, so we're having to adjust that and pay back the computer fund. One item of note is in the sewer fund. Move forward here. Is an appropriation request for $690,000 for the amalgamated Hyperion agreement, which I guess if you have questions, Mr. Zern could address those, but obviously that's for our processing at Hyperion. And then some of the other miscellaneous adjustments in the internal service funds for a fire equipment lease that was over appropriated, and then the $98,000 again on the CSI software. Just as a point of reference, one of the issues, and I'm sure everybody's heard, some of the trials and tribulations with CalPERS with their investment portfolio has been hit hard with the stock market losses. But we wanted to just remind you what our rates are, and that PERS instituted a rate smoothing effort several years ago, which we don't necessarily get benefit in good years, and we don't get the hit in bad years, except for if the investment losses are too great and it falls outside the corridors that they have set for the actuarial value of the assets. Then we could default back to increases like we experienced many, many years ago. So worst case scenario, if investment rates, I think, or losses hit negative 13%, we could fall outside that corridor, and our impact would be felt in 2011 and 12 in terms of our PERS rates could go up significantly, but we'll keep our eyes on that. Economic outlook, as everybody knows, we've had a lot of issues, the state budget issue, subprime, the credit crunch, the stock market. Unemployment has risen dramatically over the last year, from 5.4 to 8%. The budget crisis in California, and it's, I don't know if Mr. Starbird's ever seen it this bad. I haven't in my career. The gaps that the state has, they're currently, with their balanced budget as of a few months ago, they're already $11 billion upside down. They're projecting at least $16 billion added onto that for next year. And how that will impact us, we don't know yet, but I think this morning or yesterday the governor declared a financial emergency, and what that means is with two-thirds vote in each house, they can basically borrow up to 8% of our property tax, and how that would impact us, I don't know, but that would give them another $2 to $3 billion in cash flow. The caveat is they would pay it back to us within 3 years with interest. How that works, nobody knows yet. It has not been done. So,
additionally, they can't borrow again until they've repaid it. That was part
they can
of the
do it twice in 10 years, as I understand it. Again, this is new territory, so it's quite interesting. Some of the one of the articles I saw today was some of the proposals to fix their budget is the governor's proposing $4 to $5 billion in new taxes and about $4 billion in cuts. The Democrats are proposing $8 billion in taxes and $8 billion in cuts, and the Republican side has said no new taxes with unspecified cuts. So it's kind of all over the map. So we'll wait and see how that boils down. Our fiscal position as of the end of the first quarter, our sales tax was down just a little bit relative to the county. We were pretty good. We were only down 0.1%. The county was down 2.6%. Our assessed valuation, on the other hand, our property tax has been very stable. We did have a 4% increase in our assessed valuation for this year, and there's less than 1% of the properties are in foreclosure. So we're not expecting a ton, but the growth in the assessed valuation may be limited in years to come with people filing appeals and whatnot, and those take several years to work through the system. On the positive side, we have an excellent retail base. We've added the Americana, which we're watching diligently to see what type of sales tax that will produce. On the flip side, we're losing Mervyn's and some of the other retailers in town, so there's some coming in and some coming out. Lastly, there's quite a bit of reduction in construction activity. That's one of the categories of the sales tax that's been reduced, along with the automobiles. So what are we doing? The next steps, we are obviously following this very closely. We have our newly established budget team, so that is our primary effort. We are making every effort to control our spending, and we are looking at all sorts of new and existing cost reduction strategies, and we will bring those back to you in our study session in January. We are looking at developing new revenues. We have the UUT next up on the agenda that we hope to cement with taking it to vote. And again, we're monitoring the state for any actions that they have. As I stated, and Mr. Starbird stated, we'll bring you a variety of strategies, department reductions, a lot of creative ideas, I think, that Mr. McFall has been heading up with our budget reduction strategies. We will also bring you a mid-year report similar to this one in February. And with that, we'd like you to ask any questions you may have and approve the adjustments that we proposed.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Elliott. Stand by. Mr. Quintero.
I have a question on the PERS rates. So for next year, the rates are going to actually decrease a bit.
Correct.
All right, then the 15-year rate stabilization plan that's been in effect, that's going to obviously curtail some of the upward and lower cycles in terms of what we have to pay. And then finally, I heard you say that the investment losses for the PERS fund basically have to drop 16% in order for a rate increase to take place in, say, 2011, 2012?
Yeah, I think it's when they hit negative 13% in returns. Now, bear in mind their assumed rate of return is 7 3/4.
Right.
So that's basically a gap of 20% to negative 13 or 21%. So once it falls, what they have told us is once it falls beyond 13% negative, then the smoothing basically goes on hold. And then they have to start charging or raising the rates back. And that's typically how it used to work before they did the rates.
How long ago did they start the 15-year stabilization?
That happened, I believe, in 2004.
That's what I thought. It hasn't been that long.
It happened after it actually came out of the last significant downturn in the stock market when they had losses, and as a result, many of us agencies face, in fact, most cities and counties face significant jumps in their rates that they hadn't planned for. With that, PERS put into effect the fiscal year stabilization. It used to be 3 years, right. So they'd look at the returns over 3 years and adjust your rates. They took that to 15 years. So during the before the 90s, we were all facing significant reductions in our rates. Glendale down to zero. For a long period of time, we had a zero rate because we were considered superfunded. It was the losses in early 2000 that essentially wiped out the superfunding of almost all the PERS agencies and began to see these considerable increases in our retirement rates. That's when they implemented the 15-year stabilization
Well, actually, the
plan.
news is better than I anticipated. If there has to, if it's going to be that big of a drop, that's not as bad as I thought.
Well, bear in mind they've lost, I think, $70 billion in the last several months on their portfolio. So we don't know what their overall return will be, but I suspect that they will not have a very good year, as most people are. So we are watching it.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Mr. Najarian.
The special revenue funds, the red flex traffic light enforcement, can you explain that? Is there a net gain in that to us in fine revenues, or is that just them reimbursing us?
Yeah, it's revenue offset. I believe it's a grant, if I recall. I'm looking to.
Mr. Mayor, I might add, I
Mr.
saw
Stern.
Lieutenant Povolitis here, but he's left. He's closer to the actual program. If you recall, when we put the red light photo enforcement in, we put it on as a trial basis to be revenue neutral. In other words, whatever costs we incurred would be offset by the revenue we gained. We weren't expecting to make any money on this. On the other hand, not expecting to spend capital money. Once the trial period's over, we'll come back to you and see if we want to expand it, give you a report on our successes, and to my knowledge, it's been very successful, and then seek your guidance on whether you want to expand that program.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stern. Anything else, Mr. Najarian?
When we, looking forward in the recommendations, present alternative budget balancing strategies to council in early 2009. Do we have any sacred cows? Are any departments or programs completely off the table and untouchable? Mr. Starbird?
Well, that's your decision to make. In our work, the answer is no. None, including safety. In fact, we'll be bringing you what I've asked all the departments for is a list of, you recall at the beginning of this fiscal year, every department submitted 5% cuts. You worked through those and you accepted most but restored some because we had actually brought you a budget that created a surplus of about $2.5 million. You used that to restore and reduce some of the reductions to some of the departments, most notably the police department. A little bit to fire, quite a bit to police. Most of the departments took the full 5% cuts that were in the program. This year I've asked departments for another 5% full cut in their operations. And frankly, they've come in the 4.9 to almost 6% range. In addition, we're looking at other options for addressing some of the revenue shortfalls, and we bring all of those to you in the same fashion we did at the beginning of the year. But as you can imagine, because we had already reduced about 5% in the earlier budget, we're now getting into some very deep cuts into programs and personnel costs.
Please, when you come to us, be as, don't second-guess council as to what we would or would not go for. Be as creative. Give us as many options as possible. Example, I saw the city of San Juan Capistrano, rather than do layoffs, they voluntarily, with the consent of their labor unions, went to furloughs. So bring us everything. Be very creative. I think these times call for creative solutions. They're going to be tough creative solutions, but nevertheless, give us as much flexibility as possible in the different types of options that you present to us.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Najarian. Mr. Yusefian.
Mr. Mayor, a couple of observations. I think some of these items are going to, the numbers that we have downgraded, it's a little bit too optimistic. License and permits, we are downgrading it from $7.4 million down to 5.8. I think taking only $1.487 million out of permits and licenses for, I'm assuming this is building and permit. Is that what that is?
Primarily, yeah.
Right. I think it's going to be, you're going to lose more. And the problem isn't that people don't want to pull permits. The problem is that they just can't get financing. Most builders are unable to get any financing. I have spent a lot of time talking to a lot of developers and also a lot of real estate agents who happen to be in commercial industry. And it is hitting the commercial paper and it's hitting the commercial industry. So you're having a lot of buildings, office buildings, and so on and so forth, the contractors who are going to go and do that. It's not happening. Nobody's lending any money. I don't know when that's going to happen. So people are not going to be coming here and pulling permit. If anything, some people who went through the process, they will be coming and asking for refunds. I know at least two people who paid $125,000 for their permits. They'll be coming back for a refund. They just can't get a loan, and it's only a $1.3 million loan. They just can't get it. So I think that's a number that you're going to have to revise. Property taxes, I think you need to look at 2004 level and see what our property tax was in 2004. I went to a meeting that the county tax assessor was, and they're currently going out there and downgrading buildings and processing the applications very quickly for all projects down to 2004 levels. So I don't know what it was, so if there's any projects or any properties that were bought between now or 2004, we may be looking at the numbers that's going to be a much lower. Granted, it's going to take a little bit of a time to process them because our city is not the only one who will be submitting these. There will be a lot of other people, but nevertheless, people will be submitting that, so you may see some reduction in that. I am sad to see that the state has decided to go ahead and take our motor vehicle license fee. They are basically starting to charge for collection. They owe us about $1.1 million. They have stiffed us for the last 2 months, and based on what I hear is they may just stiff us for the rest of it. So
yeah, they're funding the DMV with that.
Right. So, and if that happens, we're going to probably see some reductions over there also. I think your sales tax is going to be less than what you think. As I go around, we saw the numbers that came here for the first 2 months in May and June from Americana and some of those. Let's keep in mind that was when they opened. It was a grand opening, and there was a lot of people. It was a new thing. The newness has wore out. And as I go there and watch people, awful lot of people walking through, and not just here, Galleria too, I don't see any bags in their hands unless they're buying very small items and put in their pocket. I do not see bags in their hands. So I have a feeling you're going to see a little bit of a downturn. Black Friday, while it was black, based on all the reports from CNBC and some of the other networks, apparently Saturday wasn't so black. So while people went there to buy a lot of things that were 40%, 50%, 60% off on Friday, on Saturday they didn't show up, and they were hoping to get more purchase. It's not happening. It's not doing that. So I think as you get your new numbers that are going to come in on some of these, you probably have to do a modification to even this projections that you have done. I know you're just guess estimating. And don't feel bad, because I think you are no different than probably all the genius economists who said this will never happen, and they have no clue what's going on either. So it will just take its toll, and it will be what it will be when it gets there. We just have to make the adjustments, and I agree with my colleague. There are no secret cows in here, so sacred cows, or the secret ones.
There are many secret cows.
Or the secret ones that we don't know about.
We have secret cows, but no sacred ones. Mr. City Manager, you had your hand up. Was that to answer a question?
I just wanted to make a note again that in addition to doing the typical crystal balling and revenue estimates, we have actually gone out and spoken to, for example, the manager of the Hilton Hotel about what's happening in their business. We've done an assessment project by project of projects that do seem to be moving forward. For example, DreamWorks, where there will be building permits in all likelihood pulled. So in addition to doing the typical, read the tea leaves on revenue sorts of things, we have gone out and tried to get specific information and feedback from some of the major project owners, developers, auto dealers, hotels, just to double check as we've tried to put these numbers together as best we can. But to a large extent, you're right, Mr. Yusefian, things could change, and we will continue to monitor it.
Mr. Yusefian, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just didn't know if he was...
I mean, he's absolutely correct, and we know people who really want to build. I know several companies who really want to build. They think this is the best time to build because price of construction is down, and tremendously down. There's an awful lot of hungry contractors who are willing to do the job for 25, 30% lower.
Anyone you have in mind? Mr.
Well, not me. I haven't done that. But I will tell you this. The problem is you are not getting any banks to lend the money. And many of these banks are requesting that you put in 40% of what the cost of construction is. So when you're talking about a $10 million project, the developer has to put $4 million cash in order to borrow $6 million. And a lot of these guys don't have that type of money, which means they just don't do the project. And those are some of the things. Hospitality, I think we're doing well. I talked to Ronnie Lamb on the Embassy Suite, and he told me for December they're booked out. We also have to keep in mind that new hotels have a tendency to do real well for a few months because they're new and everybody wants to go there and it's a new thing and they want to book. But what happens after that? That is going to be very important. And Mr. Mayor, one other thing. So in here, what we're seeing is just a reduction in revenues. You will be coming back to us to show us how you're going to balance the budget, because the budget was for 168 and this is only 160, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Correct. So at this point, if we did nothing and ran out the balance of the fiscal year, keeping in mind that we have a number of cost reduction measures that were implemented as part of the original budget that we're pursuing even more actively and trying to generate more savings, and we have had in place since July 1, I'll call it a soft hiring freeze, only essential positions hired, which has resulted in upwards of 100 vacant positions in the general fund being maintained. That altogether would probably, if we stayed right where we are, result in the neighborhood of $500,000 in savings if we did nothing. So we really have about a $3 million gap. But as I mentioned before, that's a very coarse way to make budget adjustments. And so we want to bring you a set of strategies that really look beyond this year into next year. We're not anticipating things will be okay in 9-10. We're anticipating this is going to continue for a while. So we're going to have to make some structural changes in the way we do business in order to make sure Glendale's budget can be maintained and balanced through this year and next.
All right, let's go to the public. We have a number of speaker cards. Our first speaker is Barry Allen, followed by Richard Espiritu.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council, staff. I'm Barry Allen. Actually, I really came prepared to speak on the document that was with the agenda item, as opposed to the PowerPoint. And that particular document, of course, is calling for you to note and file instead of asking why management forgot to make a request for $500,000 that was misclassified. It says the first indicators of a downturn in the economy and subsequent impact on the budget was just a few months ago with the revelation of a poor economy. The Nigerian vultures have been giving the council weekly reminders backed up by the city's own data for at least the last several years. On page 8 of the report, in Internal Services funds, where they inadvertently appropriated $87,759 in the last, that's in the original document of Trade C, where they, on page 7, where they added $507,000 to the budget, in part due to a contractual increase overlooked during the budget adoption process. The other people that are going to speak on some of the major difficulties, including the major shortfall that's shown. Now, on the PowerPoint presentation, one point on slide 3, $1.3 million in unavoidable expenses. And I also assume that the city has taken advantage of the lower fuel prices and adjusting some of their expenses, or are we under contracts that would make that a much more expensive process? But I think that, and I also think reducing some of the 1,900 cars and vehicles that we have might also show some sort of a savings. And I appreciate what City Manager Starbird said on the employment, cutting that down. As of yesterday, these are all of the flyers that you have for job openings here in the city. I'm going to give these to Mr. Kasakian.
He has a job already.
And, well, they are looking for some volunteers. Also, my comments are available from the back table for those in the audience who would like to pick them up. Thank you. I'm Barry Allen.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Allen. Richard Espiritu, followed by Bruce Philpott.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council and staff. I am Richard Espiritu. We were informed that just today, this evening, that we were projected a $8.1 million deficit, and that was the best case scenario. We are in a recession, and according to the news, it's going to go on for the next year. And what is the worst case scenario? This is the best case scenario, and Mr. Yusefian started talking about a lot of different issues. What is the worst case scenario? We know it's what it is best case, but I think there's a lot of worst case scenarios. And what would be the physical impact on the city of Glendale if the federal government executes Executive Order 13166? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. All right, Bruce Philpott, followed by Christian Arbit.
Good evening, Mayor Freeman, and members of the council and staff and the public. My name is Bruce Philpott. As we face tough budget decisions and more reductions in services, residents want to know, how did we get into this situation? There are really many reasons, but I'll just focus on one this evening. Because employee costs account for more than 80% of the city's budget, payroll represents the single largest cost factor. With that in mind, between years 2001 and 2007, 197 new full-time city employees were added to the workforce, and that constitutes a 13%. I should note that the number of hourly employees has remained fairly static over that same period of time at about 500 per year, and their costs are not factored in here. The number of full-time employees was 1,692 in 2001 and grew to 1,885 in year 2007. While payroll increased by 13%, the population of Glendale grew by 3%, from 200,000 to 206,000. A fluctuation of 3% up or down in the general population is normally absorbed in a municipality like Glendale. That kind of fluctuation should not significantly impact services or programs. But an increase in the workforce of 13% adds roughly about $30 million to the expenditure side of the budget. Last year, the city spent $55 million, more than it took in, according to your own revised budget numbers for this fiscal year that are found on page 3 and found on page 7 of the staff report that I was able to download on the city website, but they don't exist here. They have been changed at the time they were available to the public and presented here this evening. However, it does say that there will be an $88 million deficit at the end of this fiscal year. That's what the document said on the download.
You mean 8 million?
If your financial projections hold for this fiscal year, in spite of your requirement to deliver a balanced budget in the general fund, which you have to do, but not in the rest of it, which constitutes the greatest number of dollars, the city will post a combined deficit spending of $285 million since 2002. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Christian Arbide, followed by Herbert Milano.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and fellow council. My name is Christian Arbid, real estate broker and loss mitigator with offices at 100 North Brand. With respect to the agenda item at 8C, the second paragraph of the summary report accurately states that foreclosures are in fact less than 1% of the Glendale residential properties. Although that statement may be correct on its surface, I feel the need to bring up the flip side of the coin. There are approximately 71,000 households in Glendale. So as of November 2008, there were 925 homes available for sale. Foreclosures made up the majority of those sales and those properties. Foreclosures accounted for 528 residential properties, or in other words, 57% of Glendale, California's real estate market. The rest of that market is comprised of the resale homes and new construction homes totaling 397 homes. So let's not underestimate ourselves, and moreover, let's not fool ourselves with false hopes and tweaked numbers and percentages. Let's take off the blindfolds and take in a dose of reality. Although we are a strong community that has resisted the nationwide trend of foreclosures, we're not immune and we're not above it all. So I submit to you, instead of viewing ourselves as below the 1% line of foreclosures, I respectfully remind you that 50% of our housing sales were foreclosures. So that's 528 Glendale families that were kicked out of their homes and shown the door. That's 528 Glendale families that could quite possibly have left the city of Glendale in its entirety. That's 528 Glendale families, many with children, that got caught in a tangled web of greedy, suit-wearing, Mercedes-driving banking executives that sit in air conditioning offices all day and fed gourmet lunches. So let's not cover a black eye. Rather, let's clear our vision and clear the air so we can properly address the concern and attempt to remedy them. In order to see the future, we must look into the past and learn from our previous mistakes. So I urge you to take the percentage figures shown with a grain of salt and not place a Band-Aid on a bleeding wound. The foreclosure party is not over. It just barely started. I'd like to remind the council that we have the adjustable rate arms that are going to be resetting in 2009. We have yet to see that wave come. So it's not the fact that we're less than 1%. It's the fact that we are 57% too many. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.
Thank you very much. Herbert Milano.
Mayor Draymond, members of the City Council, my name is Herbert Milano. I think that there is a significant benefit in you going through this exercise now in front of the public, especially since most of you were here 2 years ago when you were discussing the budgets in 2006. And so what I would ask you is, had you known this outcome, what different decisions would you have made back in 2006? Because in 2006, the Finance Department presented to you a long-term budget estimation. And in one of those slides, and I presented this to you a couple of months ago, they created a caveat in one of those lines when they gave you the positive projections. And in that statement, on one of those slides, it said that that particular projection did not include the possibility of a recession. And that the possibility of a recession is at least once every 10 years. So let me give you some of the years of recessions: 1987, 1995, 2001, and now 2008. And so if you were to place yourselves back in 2006, knowing two facts: first, the caveat given to you by the Finance Department, it did not include the possibility of a recession. In other words, you were looking at very positive numbers. And second, the other word, the word bubble. And all of you are old enough to know the previous bubble of the year 2000. A bubble has a meaning. And it would have required for you to have looked very hard back in 2006 at those two particular interpretations. How does a bubble eventually come out? And then what would happen on a recession? Still, you received and agreed to multi-year, 4-year agreements on the MOUs, the fire department and for the other city employees, especially the top three: fire, police, and the GMA. And so I ask you again, if you knew this outcome back in 2006, would you have agreed to a 4-year agreement? And I think that is part of the problem, that sometimes when things are going positive, you think, I can lock these particular contracts that, 4 years into the future. You know, Mr. Yosefi, when you're asking about this other contract, I was exactly thinking the same thing. You can't lock yourself to this type of arrangement and not leave yourself a significant out. I think that you need to take a look at those MOUs hard, very hard, because I think they need to be renegotiated some way, because they are unsustainable. They were really unsustainable back then. They are unsustainable now. And I urge you to also take a look at what you have done with regard to the purse and the type of contributions that you're giving and you have promised. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Milano. All right, that's our last speaker card on this item. Let me go back to my colleagues and see if there's any other questions, comments, input, or debate. I'll start with Mr. Youssef.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A speaker brought up the number about, I think, 71,000 dwelling units, or 77,000, I can't remember. I think that is the dwelling units, not houses. That includes also apartments, so each unit, it counts. There's only about 22,000 houses, and the rest of that number is basically their apartments. Some of them are 50 units, some of them 10. And as we saw those lists, there were several apartment buildings that were in foreclosure. So that falls within that category. So I don't want people to think there's 71,000 single-family residentials in here. A question was asked, what is the worst scenario? I will tell you, I've been in this city council for 8 years. I have studied budgets for a lot longer than that, and I have been paying a lot of attention to what is going on out there, because at one point I was considering to run for the treasurer's office. So I have taken even extra steps to familiarize myself with the financial stuff. So I don't just read the paper in the morning and say, okay, there it is. I look at many, many sources based on what I hear over the last 2 months. I think we are not going to be looking at $8 million shortfall. I think we're going to be ending up this fiscal year at about $12 million off. What's going to make things even worse the following budget time is, even if we balance it for this fiscal year, the following fiscal year, we will be looking at another $8.5 million just in raises. It was a $6.5 million in raises between the 3 contracts or 4 contracts. Then there was $700,000 that was for the benefits, and about $1.3 million on the extra raises for the overtime for the fire department. So when you add all that, it's whatever we had this year, the same contracts follow through the following year. So you're going to be looking at a big chunk of money. And based on all the soothsayers who are very positive, they're telling us, if you think this year was bad, wait until you see next year. To an extent, I think as Americans, I feel like we're a bunch of frogs. They don't want to tell us the whole story at once because they're worried we may panic. So what they do is, like an amphibian, they throw us in the cold water and then slowly ratchet up. So every day you turn on CNBC, you get another bad news. And then next day there's another bad news, and so on and so forth. The bad news never stops. That's why stock market keeps going up and down, up and down. And it will continue that way. And I hate to say this, I don't want to be the doom and gloom guy, but I saw this coming. I said this may be coming, not to this extent. I even didn't see it coming to this extent. But if you look at the slide, number 3, our budget had $47,000 surplus. We passed a $168 million budget with only $47,000 on the bottom, just in case something went wrong. And that's why we're off $8.5 million. So long as I've been here, that $47,000 has been at least $2 or $3 million. At least. In some cases, even higher. So, yeah, we're here, and we're going to have to deal with it. And it doesn't matter how much I say I told you so, because it's not going to solve the problem. Not going to solve the problem. So the only way we could do this is like everybody else in the different states, roll up our sleeves, and get dirty, I guess. I don't know. We got to just get it solved.
Okay, before we move on, Mr. City Manager, is that number correct?
Well, I can't, the number he's noting is the surplus in the budget is correct. It's $47,000. I want to point out that the general fund at this time had a reserve of 31%, which is a little over $50 million, I think, Michelle, in your general fund. By anybody's standard for a city this size would be referred to as a very strong reserve, which wouldn't necessarily necessitate the need to carry a $2 or $3 million ending budget surplus. In spite of that, every year we have generally generated surpluses in the general fund, although you haven't budgeted for surpluses. You adopt a balanced budget. Any extra surplus you generally have reverts back to your reserves. Now, I'd like to point out, Mr. Mayor, since we're talking about qualifications here, I've actually been in the city business for 37 years, undergraduate degree in business and accounting and a graduate degree in municipal finance, and I've actually prepared budgets for 4 different municipalities over that 37-year period of time. And what we're facing today does not equate to all of the downturns and corrections we've faced about every 10 years. This is equivalent to, for cities, what happened in 1978 with the passage of Proposition 13, which completely changed the way cities and counties and public agencies throughout the state are financed, and the 7-year recession of 91 through 98. The others don't even hold a candle to what we're facing today in the United States and how it will affect cities. These are very unusual times for us. This is not something that, frankly, you would have based a long-term budget on because you couldn't have predicted this to occur at this depth. Does that answer your question, Mr. Mayor? I'm sorry.
It does, a little more than what I was asking, but that seems to be the case here in council chambers. Mr. Quintero, then Mr.
Yeah, well, I want to address Mr. Yosefian's "I told you so." I told you so in regards to what? You've been here for 8 years. You've approved all of the budgets and all of the raises and the MOUs with the employees and so forth. You voted for the budget, and then a week later you decided to vote against it. So I told you so in regards to what, Mr. Yosefian? Because you keep repeating that where, the campaign hasn't started yet. So I want you to explain to me what you told me. I told you so in regards to what?
I'm very happy to tell you, Mr. Quintero, my good friend. I just want to let you know, no, I mean that. I mean, this is not something that he has a legitimate question, and I'll answer that. I did not vote for the raises. I did not vote for the budget. I said I was very happy as we were going through trying to balance this budget until the next week I realized that we took $9.9 million and went through all that exercise, taking services away from the people so we could make so-called capacity in the budget to pay $8.5 million in raises. That's one of the reasons I didn't vote for it. And it's very clear, that's the reason I did. I don't think that was appropriate. I wanted to go back and discuss the issue with the unions and try to renegotiate. We're going to end up there anyway, whether we like it or not, except we will no longer be in control of that. The economy is going to be in control. And let's not forget one thing. Alan Greenspan was touted as being the genius that saved the economy of this country. This is the same guy who has more degrees than all of us in this city combined. And he was in front of the Congress saying, I goofed. I made a mistake. So do we take all this money out of Mr. Greenspan's pocket? Does he pay for that? No. Who pays for that? We do. See, and I disagree with the gentleman who said all these bankers in their Mercedes. I got news for you. Those bankers can no longer get their Mercedes because they got repossessed, and considering all the banks that have foreclosed and closed, they don't even have a job. So,
if I remember correctly, you sat in on all of the negotiations with the employee associations, et cetera, et cetera. I don't remember you voting against those contracts, Mr. Yosefian. I don't remember that.
That is accurate. I did not. I make a decision based on what the city manager and the staff provides us at the data. The data was provided at that time. We were supposed to have a $9 million surplus. $9 million surplus. Based on that data, I approved a 4%, 5% increases because we were told this is going to keep climbing. As a matter of fact, we were told that it may be at 6%, 7% range, so we would be better off if we do this 4-year contract because we can actually reduce our cost. So when you are presented with all of those facts, you act accordingly. But I am not strong-headed, or as one writer who doesn't work for the city of for the news press anymore, I'm not as boneheaded to not realize when things change, you need to make a change in your mindset and your policy. And that's why I said last year, a little bit later than this, around June, that I think we need to take some steps. You said it yourself, Mr. Quintero. You've been reading Forbes, you read Money Magazine, you read all of these things, and you knew this was coming. And I commend you for reading those because that's part of our job. And we pay attention to those. And when we saw this coming, we just kind of were hoping that it wouldn't hit us as hard. Well, I'm sorry to say, but the little wave that we thought it was going to be just a little wave has turned out to be a tsunami. And it has caught us and the rest of the world with it.
And incidentally, I don't, now that you mentioned that, I don't equate when people talk, because it happens at the podium all the time. We obviously have budgetary issues that we're going to have to deal with. There are going to be cuts, etc. But they continue to lump the state of California, the this, the that, the city of Los Angeles. This is the city of Glendale, an independent, well-run city, and the state of California and those issues really don't reflect on the city of Glendale. So, we can't keep lumping this overall economic situation that we're in to this city. We have issues, and we're going to deal with the issues, and as I talked about during the budget sessions, the sun is going to rise the next day. No one is going to, be in such a precarious state that will be unable to function or live in this city of Glendale. We're going to deal with these budgetary issues, but no, it's not the end of the world. That's the point I want to make.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Najarian.
I agree. I think what we're doing now is, what I've just heard is very destructive. It is disingenuous for anyone to say, I knew so, I told you so. Even if you say, I don't want to tell you I told you so, no one is clairvoyant up here. What we have is a projection. Every year, we look forward. We give it our best estimate, and we have a shortfall. And what we are going to do, what this council is going to commit itself to doing, is to go through and set our priorities, and when it comes time to cut the budget, whether it's $8 million, as our finance director has projected, or whether it's $12 million, as Mr. Yusefian has suggested, we are going to get it done. It would not have been proper to do it 2 years ago or 3 years ago, because that was a different time. But we are going to do it in the next few months. I guarantee you we're going to do it. And what this council needs to do is to focus on the priorities and reach out to the citizens and see what services are critical and crucial to maintaining our quality of life and our functioning as a city, and it's going to get done. I guarantee you it's going to get done. We need to move on, quit pointing the finger, quit wearing the crown of clairvoyance, and focus on the task at hand, which we'll have in the next few weeks.
Can I do a Johnny Carson thing? Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Yusefian.
May I recommend that, or suggest that the staff look into something that used to be in one account, and that was the 20 account. In the 20 account is all the consultants. The last time I checked, we had a large sums in millions and millions in that 20 account. Since we have changed some of our procedures and what we do with the budget, the 20 account has been eliminated, so all these consultants are in different departments under different categories. May I recommend, or I would like to ask, staff accumulate a list of all those consultants, what are they doing, and how much they're charging, and what the cost is. Let's look and see if we really need to hire all those consultants and pay them millions of dollars. You'll be surprised to find out what that number is, which I was at that day. So,
Okay,
and
well,
that
let
was
me-
Ginger Bramberg's pet peeve, by the way.
Let me suggest that, orchestrating off of what Mr. Yusefian just was suggesting, we suggest you add that to the things you're going to look at when you come back to us. This is not the time for that. Mr. Weaver isn't here. I'd go to him next, so I'll just make my comments. Mr. Milano, your challenge, your twofold challenge, one of them was about what would we have asked ourselves in 2006, or what would we have done differently in 2006. I wasn't on the council in 2006. However, I'm here now. Let me just say that actually the person I agree with on this dais most at this moment is Mr. Najarian. The world is not coming to an end. We will make adjustments. That's what we're here to do, and we do it by getting the best advice we can from our colleagues, from staff, and from the public, and we'll move on. Let me use the same phrase, my friend, Mr. Yusefian, and you are my friend. You were asking where the soothsayers are. I suggest that there is no one on this dais that is a soothsayer, including you. And I think if you do check the record, you will find that you did vote for all of those different salary issues. You did so based on the information at hand, exactly as you say.
On the contract.
Just as we all did. Things change. It seems to me that don't just limit it to Mr. Greenspan. Every person in our federal government charged with financial duties either wasn't engaged, didn't inform the public, or misinterpreted numbers. I don't know about you all, but here in the city of Glendale, I don't think that anyone here saw it coming either, and not to this extent. So, in any case, this is not a life-ending issue. We will make adjustments and move on. My goodness, there was a council here in this city when the bottom fell out of the economy and we had an actual bona fide Great Depression, which was a worldwide event.
Who was there?
And I wasn't here, Mr. Weaver. I don't know, maybe you were.
I was just looking at the wall. Who was here?
But
right up on that wall.
But the point is,
Remembers it vividly.
the point is that I'm sure there was a significant amount of hand-wringing going on at the time with those good fellows, who's a different kind of good fellows. Those gentlemen whose pictures are on the wall over there. We're here, and we survived that. We will certainly survive this. Anyway, well, actually, what I'd like to ask you, Mr. Weaver, is do you have any input at this point?
No, I mean, this is for informational in my book. We all know the economy was getting worse. We hear CNN, every channel you turn on, it's getting worse. Could have been predicted? No. If anybody could have predicted it, all of us would have taken different steps than what we have. I'm approaching 70. I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime. I've lived through recessions, earthquakes, everything. I watched the prices in homes in 71 when we built our house, climb dramatically through the 70s. Watched the home prices go up, knowing the bubble's going to break sometime. But what was I supposed to do? Call the president and tell him I'm smarter than he is? You got plenty of experts out there that didn't see this coming. So now we react to it. So good sitting here pointing fingers, saying we should have known, should have seen. Oh, bunk. Now we react to the problem we got, just like every city in the United States is doing, and every governor of every state in the Union is doing, and the Congress of the United States. You now react to what you've got and what you know. Voter confidence is gone. Until you turn that around, the economy isn't going anywhere. Everybody's wondering when's the time to buy in, when to start spending. When the fear factor is still there, they're not going to do it. It might take a year or more to get it turned around because the worst isn't here yet. At the same reports, people are scared. They're closing down. More businesses are closing. Restaurants are continuing to lose more business, laying off employees. Domino effect. Nobody's going to be safe from this one, and it's going to go on. We've got to keep this city safe, maintain the infrastructure, and see that the quality of life issues for this city are maintained until we can pull out. And we will. This country's existed for 250-some years. Still here. And it's going to be here tomorrow, too. So, it's just one of those things. So, we got information tonight. We've been told an estimate on revenue decreases over our projections, conservative. Is it close? Who knows? Nobody knows. But it's a good start. It's probably not going to be less than 8, right? Maybe more than 8. But we got to move on this now, and we're going to see probably within the 8, if it's going to go 9 or 10, where we're going to go next. We'll be able to make some of those judgments. But since we now know, or hopefully we'll be agreeing on a $8 million plus reduction revenue, in January we can start looking, if that is true, where are the expenses going to come from? Where are we going to cut our services, our employees, et cetera, in order to balance out with that $8 million reduction? So I'm content with that, and I'm ready to make a motion on accepting what staff has provided to us. Well, yeah. The resolution of appropriation of the adjusted budget. So I'll move 8C1 and see if there's a second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All right. Is there any further discussion before we vote? Mr. Yusefian.
No discussion. I think it's extremely important that we do get that list of all the consultants. Mm-hmm. The other reason for that is 3 of us are running for re-election, and we have a new campaign laws that says we are not allowed to accept any funds from anybody who has contracts with the city. And for life of me, I have no clue who all those people are. So I would like to know. And also the city attorney needs to know, just in case something happens, we got that under control.
Well, Mr. Elliott, just to remind you about the new campaign reform law in Glendale, 10% of everything that my colleagues raise at their fundraisers comes back to the city. It's directly into the general fund.
Oh, you don't want
it? Didn't you guys know that?
May I suggest that it be alphabetically so it'll be easier to look them up?
Okay.
Yeah, that would be good.
And just one other question that I have. There was some materials that were referred to that were on the website and then were no longer or changed. What were those?
It was, the staff report was on the website. I assume that's what it, because nothing's been put on.
I think the reference was the staff report was on the website, the PowerPoint presentation was not on the website.
And we just got that here today.
All right. Very good. Okay. Mr. Kasakian, if you would, please.
Council members Najarian?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Yusefian?
Abstain.
Mayor Draymond?
Yes. All right. Next item, please.
Item 8D is Director of Administrative Services Finance regarding special election regarding a measure related to the city's utility users tax to modernize the application of the utility users tax. At D1 is a resolution submitting to qualified electors a measure related to the city's utility users tax and directing the city attorney to prepare impartial analysis of the proposed measure. At D2 is a resolution calling for arguments for and against proposed charter amendments. And at D3 is a resolution appropriating $40,000.
Thank you, Mr. Kasakian. Just to let my colleagues know, we have 2 speaker cards on this item. So at some point, I want to go to the public.
Right.
Yes, sir.
I just want to let you know I'm going to vote for this 3 items. I just want to make it very clear. I'm always for anything that goes in front of voters. Let the public make a decision. I'm not advocating it, and I'm not even opposing it. I'm just going to vote for this to be on the ballot.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Yusefian. Is there any other input?
No, I'd like to hear from the public.
All right, Mr. Quintero?
I was going to say, isn't that what you're doing, Mr. Weaver? And
Right.
what the rest of us are doing?
Oh, yeah.
Advocating or anything else. We're just going to put it on the ballot.
All
Well,
right.
I just like, public should know in general terms why we're doing
All right,
this.
Mr. Najarian.
I'll wait for the speakers.
All right, let's go to the public. First speaker is Barry Allen, followed by Herbert Milano.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council, staff. I'm in the course of public. I'm Barry Allen. We're presently paying 7% utility users tax on our telecommunications for services that the city doesn't even perform. The utility users tax may be lost due to a court battle, and I don't know what the status of it is. I'm quite sure our city attorney can share that with us. It's being waged. Now, personally, I would like to see that tax repealed, and I would like to see the 6.5% ballot proposition not put on the ballot. I think as the public, we deserve that 7% break. Let's see, I just was looking at one of my phone bills. It's only $8.20. And I think we deserve that. I think we should just forget it, take that hit. What is it, a couple of $1 million? It's easy. Now, one of the other things that I think my concern is, and I think Mr. Howard did address it, and it's the adoption, it's the expenditure by government agencies for communications about a ballot measure. In fact, I sent that to Mr. Howard this morning. It's before the FPPC on December the 11th, and it's their legislation and rule regarding the expenditure of city funds to present a proposition, much the way they did in the city of Los Angeles. I know we're not supposed to talk about other cities, but of course we did hear what happened with their ballot proposition. It was voted in because of the way that it was worded, and most of the public didn't realize that when they were voting themselves 9%, they thought they were getting 1% off. In reality, they could have dismissed the entire 10%. And I would like to see whatever ballot proposition written. First of all, I would like to see not the ballot proposition. I'd like to see this body say, nope, we're not going to go there. But if there is such a ballot proposition, I think that we really have to scrutinize quite carefully the way it's worded, because most of the public doesn't understand this. Thank you. I'm Barry Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Herbert Milano, 3 minutes.
Mayor Draymond, members of the City Council, my name is Herbert Milano. You know, when I look at a utility users tax, I think about the fact that, you know, when we turn on the lights, we pay utility users tax. When we turn on the gas to, boil some water, we pay a utility users tax. When we flush the toilet, we pay utility users tax. In other words, every possible means for the government to figure out how to take a tax, the government will do. When I graduated from college, I remember working for this mortgage company, and some of the older workers there were complaining about the fact that they might lose their homes, their own people who were working in the mortgage business, because they could not afford the tax that was being imposed on them. These are people that perhaps were my age back then when I was in my 20s. And the thing that struck me is that how could government be so incredibly insensitive and cruel to have people in their retirement years begin to lose their homes? And that was the essence of Proposition 13. And I worked very hard back then, to ensure that that law would get passed. I volunteered because I saw firsthand what was happening to many people that I knew. And yet, in this room, as well as in the GUSD and in the documents from the police department, I see attacks on Proposition 13. And that to me is an aberration. I see now how a city works and how the salaries and the pensions and the benefits have increased incredibly above the population rate, above the inflation rate. We're paying incredible amounts, six-figure salaries for people who would never in private industry earn that kind of money. And then when we see an opportunity to basically balance the budget, what do? We figure out a way to tack it on or readjust or modernize the utility users tax. These taxes are being challenged. In the past discussion, you didn't discuss the fact that the Department of Water and Power in Los Angeles, that transfer, that's also being challenged. So what if we were to challenge this tax here in Glendale? That'll be another $20 million that you can take. So what the answer is always, the easy answer is figure out a way of finding another tax to be able to impose on the public. And yet when it comes down to the real hard things, which is really tough negotiations when it comes to the MOU, where all the expenses are, they're not really there for us. So if you're going to put this in here, why don't you put the MOUs for the taxpayers to approve? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Muller. Mr. Quintero.
I just want to read a little bit of the staff report. The city's utility tax has been in place for nearly 40 years, so this is nothing new. 40 years. Now it will be up to the public to vote, and if it goes the way it's gone in other cities, I suppose it's going to be approved. These ballot measures have been approved by local voters throughout the state by wide margins. I'm going to read the cities, and it's going to be a long list. Pasadena, Sacramento, San Gabriel, Los Angeles County, Santa Monica, San Jose, Compton, El Monte, Culver City, Ventura, Los Angeles, San Bernardino, Huntington Park, Hermosa Beach, Redwood City, Richmond, Eureka, Menlo Park, Daly City, Emeryville, Tulare, Los Altos, Gilroy, Torrance, Hawthorne, Indio, Inglewood, Lakewood, Long Beach, Linwood, Moreno Valley, Sacramento, San Francisco, San Leandro, Santa Barbara, Stockton, Malibu, Sierra Madre. Of the 16 public agencies that sought voter approval of an updated existing UUT ordinance, all passed.
We better vote against it then.
Today, approximately two-thirds of the total telecom UUT in California is voter approved. So, like I say, all we're doing tonight is having the public decide whether they want to vote for it or not, but we've been working with this tax for 40 years. It's nothing new.
Right. Yes, Mr. Weaver, then Mr. Youssef.
I'd just like Bob to very, very briefly explain why this is important to be passed.
I would be happy to do that. As we pointed out in the October 7th budget study session, there's been numerous challenges to existing UUT ordinances. This is an effort to put it on a ballot per Prop 218, and the city attorney could probably tell you a lot more about Prop 218 rules than I can. But any adjustments to tax, it's safest to put it to the vote of the people. As council has said, this tax has been in place since 1969. Our attempt here is to modernize it with the new technology, the VoIP, and some of the other technologies that is not addressed in the current ordinance. So with that and the application to the new technologies, the effort is to make it revenue neutral and reduce the rates. So the risk is if it does, if we are challenged and we lose the utility users tax for telecom, it's an $8.7 million hit to the general fund. UUT, if I recall, is about $28 million a year in total to the general fund. So it's a very important revenue source for us, which is why we're bringing it to you.
Mr. Quintero,
I assume this applies to companies. Is that correct? It's not just for private. In other words, Disney and all of the corporate Nestle's and all the rest of them, they're paying that same tax.
Correct.
Now, the challenges themselves, have they come mostly from consumer groups or from the telecom industry? From the telecom industry? Oh, boy. Well, that's interesting, Gene.
Who frankly only pass it through.
All right, Mr. Youssef.
I think the information was cleared by Bob because the speaker talked about it's only $2 million. It's actually $8.7 million.
Correct.
And it's true. Every time we use anything, we pay UUT tax. When you boil the water, not only you pay UUT tax for the gas to boil it, you also pay UUT tax for the water that you're boiling too. So, but that's life, you know. I've been paying that for as long as I lived in this country. So, as they said when I came to this country, no free lunches. So, got to pay for something.
Let me go to Mr. Najarian.
I just would like to thank Mr. Yusefian for his advocacy on this issue, and I will join him in that.
All right, very good. If there's nothing else, Mr. Kasakian, let's entertain a motion.
8D, 1, 2, and 3.
I'll second that with a question. Who will be writing the pros and the cons? And there is an amount of $40,000 to be spent by the city for educate the public. Who will be doing the educating?
I'll answer the first
I hope it's not going to be a consultant.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, I'll answer the first question. Mr. Elliott can answer the second, or perhaps another member of staff. And the first question, who adds pros and cons, you determine that based upon our municipal code. Our municipal code allows first priority to the elected officials to determine if you want the arguments in favor, if you want to choose the pro side, for example, or the I side of this. You can make that determination. Individuals and entities, again, in an order based on what you find in the municipal code, can submit requests to write arguments. The city council will ultimately have the ability to select from amongst one or more individuals or entities that submit requests to choose that. They have to submit those requests by some date, I believe January 12th, if I'm not mistaken, of 2009. Normally, the city council, if they're putting something on the ballot, wants to have staff provide them with the argument, and the city council essentially adopts that argument as the argument you find in the ballot, either in favor of or against the measure. In the case where the city council puts something on the ballot, it's usually in favor of the measure.
All right. Anything you want to add to that, Mr. Elliott?
Only to the second question, Mr. Mayor, and that is the $40,000. As you're probably aware, once you've approved the matter being on the ballot, the city cannot advocate a position, but we can utilize it to, for example, address the potential budgetary and programmatic impacts if we lost $8.7 million. That's the purpose of this. At this point, we wouldn't anticipate utilizing a consultant. If we thought there was a role for one, that would all come back to you.
All right.
I recommend the city manager write the pros.
Well,
that's not on the agenda.
Why don't we come back to that when it's on the, actually on here, on the agenda, or before the council, let's say.
Oh, that comes back to us?
It will come back,
Right.
yeah.
Okay, it's not a part of this agenda item. All right, we have a motion, and we have a second. Mr. Kasaki.
Council members Najarian.
Yes.
Quintero.
Yes.
Weaver.
Aye.
Yusefian.
Aye.
Mayor Draymond.
Yes.
Thanks for the whole hard work.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the vigorous debate. Let us move on to the next item.
9 is hearings, and 9A is Director of Planning regarding Glendale Municipal Code amendments related to use variance, PZON 2008-003, and 9A1 is ordinance for introduction related to use variances.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kasaki. Mr. Hagani.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You might remember that this item was initiated by you several months ago, and you referred the discussion of various options to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission has really had extensive discussions on several options, and what you see in the staff report is the result of the discussions and the recommendations by the Planning Commission. Wolfgang Kraus, Principal Planner, has prepared the staff report and is here to give you a short staff report and answer your questions.
Mr. Kraus.
Thank you, Hassan. Again, Wolfgang Kraus, Principal Planner, Mayor Draymond, members of council. With that introduction, then, let me go right to what the Planning Commission has recommended. It is basically a revised version of one of the options that we ended the council meeting with several months ago when the issue was before you to consider whether or not we should go forward with this. That option was having use variances considered rather than by the zoning administrator as the initial hearing officer, be considered by the Planning Commission with appeals to City Council. So the revisions that the Planning Commission has proposed are not a complete status quo. In other words, don't change the code. They're not a complete ban on use variances. They are only bans on future use variance applications in the 3 single-family zones, R1R, ROS, and R1, with the exception that those cases that have already been approved, that have expiration dates, future applicants, when those time periods run out, will be able to apply for the same use to the Planning Commission with appeals to the City Council, provided that the applications are filed prior to the expiration dates. Otherwise, the process will continue as it is today, with only a majority vote being required for approval, no supermajority, and in non-single-family situations, people can still apply for use variances, but the initial review authority, where it isn't someone else now, like yourselves, in redevelopment areas, they will be considered by the Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission can approve them with a simple majority similar to today. Again, as I've indicated, the draft ordinance still says Board of Zoning Appeals until you make that a permanent change, which is an item coming before you very soon. So again, the ordinance itself still says Board of Zoning Appeals, but your interim ordinance indicates that in actuality, it's the Planning Commission that's going to be considering this. Now, that's the option that's the suggestion of the Planning Commission, and that's their recommendation. You still have the option today of telling us to draft something that has a total ban, or telling us we don't want any changes or anything in between. So I have a letter that I want to distribute. This was part of the record of the Planning Commission. It's a letter from Shogi Yepremian, one of our local planning consultants, who did recommend to the Planning Commission that the status quo be maintained. In other words, don't eliminate the use variance process and still allow the zoning administrator to be the initial hearing officer. Again, I didn't get that in your report, but it was something that was available to the Planning Commission before it made its recommendation. So then, let me ask if there are any questions at this
Tell you what, Mr. Krause, let me ask that very question. Let's see if there are. Are there any questions or comments from my colleagues before we go to the public?
No, I've gone a little quickly, but I think this council understands what use variances are. We've had this discussion before, so I was kind of a little bit short tonight.
Anything? Mr. Weaver, anything?
No question.
Mr. Quintero? Mr. Najarian?
Well, let me ask a question, just so I'm clear.
Excuse me, folks. If you're going to speak, please fill out a card and we'll come up and recognize you. You can speak, but we're not going to shout from the audience.
Let me ask some questions, Mr. Krause, just so I'm clear on what types of proposed uses require a use variance as opposed to a CUP or any other type of zoning adjustment.
Sure. A conditional use permit is different than a variance in that it's specifically listed in a particular zone as a conditional use permit. A conditional use permit then is a discretionary application which can be approved or denied based upon the code required findings, but it's generally, in terms of the basic principle, is it's a use that could be appropriate in a given zone, but not necessarily in every single location in that because of its unique characteristics. We have several things like service of alcoholic beverages is a rather minor example. A heliport's a more significant example. In other words, a heliport isn't an appropriate use in every single location in a particular zone for obvious reasons. There are more subtle examples. New single-family houses on certain hillside properties is another example. Not the classic example, but it's something we use. A variance, use variance is one type of variance. A variance in general is a deviation from the code. It's something that's not allowed in the code or provided for in the code. So a use variance would be authorization to permit a use in a particular zone that isn't specifically listed in that zone. That could be a multifamily use in a single-family zone. It could be a commercial use in a residential zone, an industrial use in a commercial zone, an institutional use in a residential zone. The staff report has listed a number of examples of that, which is basically the same list we gave you the last time we talked about this issue. Could be a park simple as a parking area adjacent to a residential zone, intruding into the commercial zone. It could be, the rear 10 feet of a commercial building intruding into a residential zone, or maybe the zone boundary is a straight line, but the property lines jog. It could be even a subtle distinction in a type of commercial use, like a certain amount of wholesaling in a zone that doesn't permit wholesaling, warehousing in a zone that doesn't permit warehousing.
Let me give you perhaps another sort of question/example. When we were I was fortunate enough to be on the San Fernando Road Zoning Advisory Committee. And while we were developing those different zones, we went through a exhaustive list, what we thought was an exhaustive list of uses. Do we want to allow this? Do we want to allow that with the CUP? Permitted, not permitted? So in that, imagine the San Fernando zone, and let's say there's a use that was not contemplated in any of our exhausted use, neither excluded nor affirmatively included. Would the inclusion of that type of use then under our current zoning, our laundry list of what's included or excluded, would the permit for that type of use then require a use variance?
Well, there are two options, Councilman Najarian, in that situation. Sometimes technology changes to include a new use, or sometimes we didn't anticipate something that, had we known about it, we would have included. So the potential applicant, if you will, has two options in that case. One is to amend request a code amendment, which then, if approved by the council, would apply to all properties in that zone, or they can apply for a use variance. The problem with a use variance in that situation is you'd have to make a case that that particular property was so unique, not that it would apply generally to other property in that zone or neighborhood. So your situation, typically, the more appropriate application would be the code amendment, which, again, the council could initiate on its own, or you could require an applicant to file an application. So a variance is always a situation where it's a uniqueness, not something that would apply across the board to everything in that zone.
Is there typically a time limit on a use variance as opposed to a ordinance change?
Well, an ordinance change obviously would allow that use as long as it operated under the regulations off into the future. A use variance can be conditioned, and it can be conditioned with a time limit. Most use variances in the past have had time limits, because sometimes conditions in the neighborhood change. So we want to maintain some sort of control.
And just as a means of background for myself, if for no one else, currently, how does a use variance work its way through our current system?
Right now, the zoning administrator in most of the city, but not in all situations, is the initial hearing officer. The city council is actually, as of recently, the initial hearing authority in some situations with variances, but outside those situations, it's the zoning administrator with appeals to the Board of Zoning Appeals / Planning Commission, and then appeals to the city council. A simple majority required for approval on appeals.
At both levels.
At both levels, right, at both levels. The argument, part of the argument that's been presented all along is the state has a section of the government code that prohibits use variances in general law cities. And so part of the argument was, well, if the state thinks it's that significant to prohibit them in general law cities, why not here in Glendale as a charter city?
Can you give me, and I've asked this question all day today, I want you to give me the poster child example as to why we should ban use variances.
In general or in the single family zones?
I mean, Well, we're talking about single-family zones.
In this case, the draft ordinance only is proposing to ban them in the single-family zones.
Okay. Can you give me an example of something that's occurred in the last 10 years that is, if you were I know you're not an advocate, but if you were an advocate
of getting rid of that,
to eliminate the use variances, what would you point me to and say, look, this is what's wrong with the system?
in a single-family zone?
Yes.
I don't know if I can do that in the last 10 years.
501 East Glen Oaks.
I see hands going up.
Yeah, well, I could point to that
I'm
as
serious. I mean,
yeah, no, I know.
501 East Glen Oaks.
501, what
No,
is that?
702 East Glen Oaks.
701?
That was an example.
702.
Are you talking about one that was approved or just applied for?
No, approved. I mean,
Approved. Well, approved in the last 10 years, I think I'd have a little trouble coming up with
Let me
one
go to
in
Mr.
a single-family
Hagani. He
zone.
seems to have his hand up.
If I may, I will give you two generic examples of the type of use variances that have been recommended to be banned. One would be a use variance that we processed, I would say, about 4 years ago, on a commercial property in the San Fernando Road zoning area that wanted to expand and wanted to increase the commercial space, and then applied to expand into the residential property next door so that they could expand actually the building to expand their operation. And that was one case that was approved. Another case that was not approved was for a residential property that was adjacent to a commercial zone, applied to get a use variance to operate a commercial establishment on the residential property, and that particular case was not approved as a use variance.
Is that 702?
That's 702.
Well, that wasn't a use variance. Was it a use variance?
It was first a rezone, and then the applicant applied for a use variance, and the use variance was also not approved.
And that came to council, approved by the zoning administrator.
And it was appealed.
No, it was denied.
It was denied by
The use variance was denied by the zoning administrator, and then it was continued being denied and was appealed all the way to the city council.
Ultimately not.
And the city council.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's have one speaker at a time. Okay. Mr. Hagani, you have the floor at the moment.
That's right. When it came to the city council, the vote on the city council was not decisive, because you needed 3 votes in order to sustain or reverse the previous decision. But
Mr. Howard.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, let me correct that just slightly. The matter that was indecisive was the zone change matter that came before the city council. The use variance that followed that did not make it to the city council. The appeal was withdrawn by the applicant.
All right.
Thank you.
Again, the poster children I could come up with are way off in the past, usually for commercial or institutional uses in multifamily zones.
Someone else talk.
All right, you're about to have your wish granted. Mr. Yusefian.
Give you a poster child. It was passed in May 12th of 2008. This is allowing use variance on 4444 Lowell Avenue, which is a kindergarten to 8th school. 500 students. This is on R1 low-density residential. This was a school that has been there for a while, and they apply every so often for that. So there's a private school that was on a single-family residential zone that needed to have a use variance. Correct?
That's correct. That's an example that we pointed out in the code. Years ago, a private school in a R1 zone was a conditional use permit. When the code was amended, that was taken out. So when the previous conditional use permit expired, their only choice was to process a use variance. And that's what's been happening.
Also, there are some examples in here that if you want to have a driving school in a commercial, you have to get a use variance, and so on and so forth. Let me ask you, I don't know if you watched our deliberation around 2:30, so I'll ask you one question. We have a residential project, a zone R1. We would like to put community gardens there. Not a permitted use. Do you need a use variance, or do you need a variance?
Well, use variance is a form of a variance, so right, if that use is not specifically listed in the R1 zone, then you've got 2 options. Amend the code or seek a use variance. That's correct.
So in order for you to...
Well, or change the zone. I mean, that's the other situation. So you really got three options. The zone change is, if it's a spot situation, is not really realistic. If it's a borderline situation, maybe there'd be a case to be made. Maybe there wouldn't. It just depends. But, right. Change the zone, change the code, get a use variance.
Okay. Also, answer to one of your questions, down on Brand, I think it's off of one of the streets, Alan Gwen Chevrolet is, they own a piece of property right next to it. They actually own it. And it was empty, except it was zoned R1. And they wanted to basically store vehicles on that R1 site that was being empty, and they own it. And they needed to get a use variance for that.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that case, but if that were the case in the South, if that were in the South Brand plan, that still has limitations on the uses. So, right, you could change the South Brand plan, the text of it, change the zone.
Well, the property is not in the South Brand site.
Okay.
The property is actually in a regular zoning. The property is zoned R1. The dealership is in a South Brand, but they owned that property, and they needed to store vehicles. Even though they own the property and it's empty and there's no houses on it, still they had to go get use variance in order to put the vehicles there.
Again, same three choices: zone change, code amendment, or use variance. All right. And this, the draft the Planning Commission recommended is only prohibiting new use variances in the single-family zones. If you've already got one, you can still apply again. And it doesn't affect any other applications in the non-single-family zones. Multifamily zones, you can apply. Commercial, industrial, mixed use, you can apply.
I don't have any questions from him. I have my opinion, but I'll wait for the...
That's what I was asking. If you don't mind,
and again,
I'd
this
like
is
to
a code amendment, so it does require a 4/5 vote.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Krause. Let's go to the public on this. Let's open the public hearing. Our first speaker is Michael Tian.
Good evening, Mayor Draymond, City Council. My name is Michael Tian. I am a resident of Adams Hill. If the status quo was working, we would not be here, so I think that advocating no change in the form of that letter that you received, I think that would be inappropriate. I think that the recommendations that came out of planning are sober and appropriate to address the concerns of just to a degree, the coordinating council, but I think the residents of Glendale. It does allow for commercial zones to have use variances, which is, I think, would address your concern, Mr. Najarian. As far as community gardens and things like that in residential areas, the solution is not to continue the use of use variances. The solution is to amend the code to allow community gardens. If that is an appropriate use for the city of Glendale, that's what you do. That's what it's there for. I think that the reasoned approach that the planning department has taken addresses a lot of concerns that residents have in terms of what is seen as an abuse of the use variance process. All it does is elevate the bar, make it a little bit more difficult for use variances to be implemented in the city by basically removing the zoning administrator from the process. Again, I think it's reasonable. I think it's appropriate. I think it's a step in the right direction. It does not hamper anybody's ability to do what they think is necessary in the city of Glendale, and it certainly doesn't hamper our ability to maintain the integrity of our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tian. Myrna Sten.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members and staff. Myrna Stanley on behalf of Verdugo Woodlands Homeowners Association. We voted, a long time ago now, to oppose the continuance of use variances and to allow the existing use variances to be grandfathered, and if they're pretty innocuous, just to be heard by the zoning administrator. I think the fact that the state disallows general law cities from having use variances says an awful lot. And Councilman Jaron, you were talking about all the deliberations you made on San Fernando Road, and do we want this and we don't want this, and perhaps you didn't think of something. Well, when an appropriate use comes up for San Fernando Road that would fit in well, then, as Mr. Tian said, the proper avenue is a zoning code amendment, and then anyone else with that type of use would just get in there easily. The code would be amended. Otherwise, I mean, we consider it as just, I hate to say it, poor planning practice. It's almost spot zoning with conditions, a use variance. And I remember when this all started, I checked around with a lot of cities and I couldn't find any, but come to think of it, there could have been general law cities. But our position is to oppose them, and barring that, then at least we have the R1 protected in this draft ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was our last speaker. I will close the public hearing. Mr. Weaver.
I'll make it very quick. I support the Planning Commission recommendation as stated. Thank you.
And Mr. Quintero.
I also support the recommendation, and I think the two speakers made some excellent points. And then let me add that in terms of charter cities, Burbank, Pasadena, our two sister cities, do not permit use variances. I don't know if it's restricted to single-family neighborhoods, just in general. No use variance in general. And all we're talking about tonight is single-family residences, and neither does Santa Monica and Long Beach. So I think this is the way to go.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Quintero. Mr. Najarian.
I'm really trying to keep an open mind about this, and I keep asking, somebody show me what is wrong with the current system. What I see in the current system is flexibility. I see 2 levels of safeguards at the BZA/Planning Commission at City Council. Currently the types of uses that are seeking use variances are schools. They are community gardens. Problem with changing the ordinance is, if we change the ordinance for community gardens, you can have community gardens everywhere. On Royal Boulevard, you could have a community garden put there. If you change the ordinance, that was one of the suggestions. We don't want to change the entire ordinance. We want to look at specific plots of land and determine their use. I don't see what the ill effects are. We were talking about 702 East Glen Oaks. That was not a use variance. It never came to council. Council never made an ill-advised decision to approve that. It came as a zone change. That died. You're talking about an issue where there was an expansion, one case where there was an expansion in a commercial zone. I think we have sufficient safeguards. At this point, I'm not ready to vote for it. However, I know that one of the proponents, whom I respect greatly, is Lori Collins. I do not see her here. I would be willing to continue this to hear from Lori Collins to tell me what is wrong with the current system. Somebody point me to something and say, look, this is where the zoning administrator screwed up, followed by the BZA screwing up, followed by the city council screwing up. I don't see that. And if I saw an example, I would, I think, have a different look at this. I think we're talking about prospective harm, prospective issues where the zoning administrator might screw up, followed by the BZA screwing up, followed by the council screwing up. Well, I don't see that here. We're talking about a series of conditional events. I just don't see it. So I'm not ready to vote for this today. Someone wanted to make a motion to continue it, to have the eloquent Lori Collins try and convince me. I'm certainly, willing to keep an open mind to that level, or one of my colleagues as well. I think my other two colleagues referred their comments to, adopted the comments of Ms. Stanley and Mr. Tian, but I'm just seeing sort of general prospective issues of harm on the horizon that I just don't see now. So that's my position.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr.
I
Weaver.
just want to add one thing. This is an ordinance for introduction. We're not voting on it. It'll be coming back.
You're right.
Roy Collins, whoever can be here. So when it's time, I'll introduce the ordinance.
I stand corrected. You are exactly right.
Okay. Mr. Yusefian.
Okay. I'll tell you what I will vote for. I will vote for taking a use variance to go to Planning Commission, then to County Council. I will not vote for eliminating it for R1, R1R, or ROS. I think it is important for us to keep that flexibility because sometimes certain uses that are in some of these places, we need to keep that. I think if the City Council and the Planning Commission is willing to allow that type of a use when the public has a hearing and bring their concerns, that's fine with me. I have no problem with that. We'll hear it, and if it's controversial, chances are we will not probably vote for that. Nevertheless, I think it's important for us to keep that. And in all honesty, I do not believe that the existing businesses or schools or golf courses or churches or whatever facilities that are in these current zones are going to get an automatic renewal based on experience that we had with one project that was told that they can actually operate their business, and then later on the condition was modified a little bit, and later on they lost the whole permit. I tend to think that we will be dealing with major consequences when a school that has 500 kids misfires, does not apply on time, gets its its conditional use permit expires or change of use variance expires, and they go there 2 days later, and guess what? They cannot get another change of use variance. What do you do with those 500 kids? Whose houses do they go to? And furthermore, I do not want to do a major zone change for certain unique uses. I don't want a community garden next to my house. I didn't buy my house to be next to a community garden, as much as I may like it. The fact is, I do not want to change zoning to allow all these uses for all of R1 or ROS or R1R. This is not the right thing to do. I think the best system that has worked for city for many, many years has been to create a change of use variance. And I understand the argument on behest of some of the people in the homeowner associations, which is, maybe one person should not be in charge of making that decision. Okay, I will buy that. Let's go to Planning Commission. They have 5 people there that are representatives that are appointed by this council. And if you don't agree with that, it comes down to us, and we will make a decision. It is much easier to get 3 votes to allow a change of zone, let's say use variance, on something we just approved today, which is, let's put it on that corner. You need 3 votes of yes to grant a change of use variance to allow that community garden there. If it's a zone change, it requires 4 votes. What if you don't get those 4 votes? So it's a double-edged sword. So this is one of those things, I don't think it's broken. No one has been able to make the case. As long as I've been on BZA and on this council, I haven't seen a controversial project be approved. Yes, they have gone through the system. That's what the system is. A lot of murderers go through the court system, and guess what? Everybody says, oh, they're going to go free, go free. They end up in jail. And some go free. But that's the system. And this system, I'm yet to see one, with the exception of 702, which, by the way, was denied, which means it didn't make it. So what does it mean? The system worked. Couldn't make the findings. The findings are very hard. And even if it was approved, it would have been appealed to BZA at the time, which I don't think it existed anymore. It was Planning Commission at that point. And then from there, it would have come to us. And I can guarantee you, I don't think you had the votes to approve that. Probably would have been unanimous at the time. So that's where I stand on that. But I will vote for a change to go from zoning administrator to Planning Commission, and that's it.
Skip the zoning.
Right. So it just goes to Planning Commission, because I think some of the argument has been made, the Coordinating Council, in some of the other places, that why is it one individual make a decision? And there's a lot of cases that one person makes a decision on, and we don't agree, and sometimes we don't catch it. So this will be an opportunity for us to change that, make the loop a little bit smaller, allow it to go to the Planning Commission. Now you have 5 members of the Planning Commission that hear that case, and then there are community people that we appoint, and if they don't agree with that, then it comes to us.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Yusefian. Mr. Quintero.
Well, for me, I'm always concerned about single-family neighborhoods and all of the different issues that always seem to appear. One of the latest ones are now the telecom companies wanting to put their antennas all over single-family neighborhoods. So for me, anything we can do to make it more difficult for someone to change the use in a single-family neighborhood, remember, we're not talking about commercial or manufacturing, etc., but in a single-family neighborhood, anything we can do, I think, is in the best interest of the property owners. And that list of cities, Burbank, Pasadena, Santa Monica, Long Beach, those are very vibrant cities. They are, in some cases, Long Beach, the second largest city in L.A. County. Pasadena is also big. So it's working there. There's no use variances there, and actually the planning staff seem to indicate not only are there no use variances in single-family neighborhoods, there are no use variances, period. So, I mean, and the state of California doesn't allow it for general law cities. So, to me, it makes sense to do it. I don't think we're going to be really, doing that much, quite frankly, but I think it's just another safeguard for single residents.
Yes, Mr. Yusefian.
I'd like to answer that question. Having been a contractor and worked in some of these cities, not all of them, I will tell you some of those general law cities, their zoning code is more liberal. It allows a lot more stuff than we do. This city and our former city fathers made a decision either to make their zoning code very liberal or make it very restrictive and allow little things to happen through a conditional use permit, a variance, or a use variance. That's the difference. If you look at some of the permitted uses in some of our code, and you take all those and you go to other cities, you will see they don't need a conditional use permit in many of those cities. They're just allowed by right. We said no. We want more control. We want to see every single one. And that's the difference. That's why we have what we have. Maybe it was the wrong direction. I don't know. But this goes back a long time. And if they wanted to change that, they had to sit there and allow a lot more than what we are allowed in this city. I tend to think part of the reason it has made Glendale very unique is because our code is very protective. But we allow little minutiae here and there when there is a legitimate reason for it. That's the difference between Burbank and... I can do a lot more in Burbank than I can do in Glendale. A lot more.
I have a question.
I don't know if that's good or bad, but...
Sorry. A question for the city attorney and Mr. Hagani. Several times now the issue of community gardens has come up. And as Mr. Kraus was describing it, there are 3 options. Mr. Yusefian, when he was speaking, settled on changing the zoning, but I heard 2 other options. Mr. Najarian makes the point that if you change the ordinance, then don't you throw the door wide open to put a community garden anywhere in an equivalent zone. So how would you deal with something like that?
On the latter, it's just on the latter, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, it's really a matter of the language that you use in terms of what you permit within the zone. For example, and again, this is all hypothetical because, as I indicated earlier this afternoon, this is an issue of first impression. We're not certain even a use variance would be required for a community garden in this context. It may only be a conditional use permit. We need to look at that and work with the planning department. And there's some legislative history that we need to look at, frankly, because community gardens are an actual permitted use in certain contexts with a homeowners association, for example, that runs it. We're looking at a park. Is a community garden similar to a park, in which case it could be interpreted by the zoning administrator to fall within that or open space. So we still need to look at those issues. I couldn't sit here right now and I don't want to go back and revisit what we did at 2:30 because we're going to be looking at that issue. But in the context of changing the zone to allow particular use, you could change the zone to allow particular use with limits, for example. You can change the zone to allow something with a conditional use permit. So it doesn't have to be as a matter of right.
All right. Just out of curiosity, the school...
Add to that if you...
Oh, I'm sorry, son, I didn't see that.
If I may just, there is one important distinction between conditional use permits and variances that I'd just like to point out. A conditional use permit is a permitted use that's conditionally permitted. A use variance, or any kind of variance, pretty much is not permitted, and only the restrictions and the particulars of a property that separate that property from other property somehow bring parity to that property compared to other property owners. That's a whole different way of administering things. For example, if you wanted to use the community, notwithstanding what the city attorney just said, if you wanted to use the example you used, perhaps the use variance may not be the best approach to allowing a community garden, for example, in a zone that's not allowed. Perhaps a conditional use permit or some other mechanism, and we're looking at that as the city attorney said. So to understand this use variance as a permit is a misunderstanding of it, and oftentimes people do that. I just wanted to say that.
All right. One last question. The private school, what was the address again? Is
4444 is the Chalmea.
Yeah, that was purchased by that organization. It was already a school. It was one of the Glendale Unified Schools. It was Lowell. I know where it is now. I know where it is. It was Lowell Elementary School. It was already existing as a school for eons until the Glendale Unified downsized, and that property was sold along with Montrose Elementary and a few others. But you're right, it is a residential area. Anyway.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
One other thing, I think Mr. Quintero alluded to the telecommunication towers. Correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is this previous councils in 92 or 96, I think 97, passed the ordinance that basically forbids telecommunication towers in residential zone unless there is no other site that could be found. So they are not put into a residential property. Most of the ones that we're talking about is in public right-of-way. Am I correct?
Yeah, to essentially the greatest degree you are. There are some nuances there, but yes.
Right. So I can't put one in my backyard. Not that I would want to.
Right, but the point I was trying to make is whether it's traffic, whether it's cell towers, whatever it is, people buy single-family homes and single-family neighborhoods because they want peace and they want quiet. And so anything we can do to continue to have people enjoy the quiet enjoyment of their home, I'm for it. Then I don't think that by doing this, we're going to affect anything else in the city. However, we will be taking one more step to protect single-family neighborhoods.
Well, I think one of the things they buy, Mr. Quintero, is predictability.
And predictability.
Yeah. Mr. City Manager, you've had your hand up.
Well, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Mr. Yosefian raising his idea about separating the elimination of use variances from a possible change in the process prompts me, although it's all embedded in one ordinance currently that would require 4 votes, might have the city attorney just comment briefly. If they were 2 separate items, for example, if you don't have 4 votes on the ordinance to eliminate use variances in a residential zone, what the votes would be if you just addressed the process as Mr. Yosefian has described. Because I think the vote requirement would be different.
Well, I'd also like to weigh in on this at some point, but I seem to not be able to get more than half a sentence out before that. And then we'll do just that, if you don't mind. I'm prepared to support this. I just want to go on the record. And whenever there is an issue of a change that affects the ability to, whenever this council seems to look at issues that we're going to vote on, which may change the ability of traditional single-family neighborhoods to be contorted in some way, to bend the predictability of it, broaden the ability to turn it into something that it was never designed to be, suddenly we hear the sky is going to fall. And simply put, the examples in cities, neighboring cities, and other cities where they have extremely active development historically that don't have this just doesn't bear that out. The other thing, one of the other issues that bears on something Councilmember Yusefian was suggesting, and maybe we'll end up going down that road, we'll see soon, but one of the things is that there is a rodeo. I mean, it's a rodeo effect that begins to take place in our city, in which many of our residents believe that to invest the level of autonomy that we grant to our zoning administrator in these processes puts her in the position of receiving the perception that there's always a deal being struck. And I think that's unfair to her, and I think that the perception is dangerous too, in and of itself. Yes, there are examples of the example of 702 East Glen Oaks. It was pointed out, yes, it was denied, but also at what cost? At tremendous amounts of time, tremendous amounts of following up on the part of individuals. Remember, this wasn't just a simple deal. This was a property where basically city staff was being misled to start with. And then we got into the zoning issues and all of that. And then it was a gamble on a let's play double or nothing on it and see if we can get it through. At what expense to the public of having to follow this and follow this and follow this and chase it down and appeal it? These kinds of things. This is, there is a cost to that. So it isn't enough in my book to simply say, okay, that one didn't make it through. Also, and although this relates only to single family or our zones, the experience in the commercial zones doesn't exactly instill confidence in our residents either. Because in my book, it's also a rodeo there. And we've seen it on this dais in a number of appeals that have come forward in the last little while, where one ill-conceived word or phrase by the zoning administrator, and suddenly we're off to the races. There's appeals, and this place is packed with people, and race is implied, and everything else. That doesn't bode well. It doesn't exactly instill confidence in the residential portion of this. So anyway, I know we don't all agree on this, and it doesn't look like we're going to meet the threshold. But I just wanted to have the opportunity to weigh in to say where I am on this, and I agree with the Planning Commission on this, and so I would support this. Mr. City Attorney, I don't, I think we can all count, so I don't see it moving forward in that direction at this time.
Well, I'm prepared to introduce the ordinance.
It was introduced already.
No, it hasn't been.
I said I was going to at the right time.
Weaver
I don't care.
introduce it.
Go ahead.
All right, well, I'll introduce the ordinance at 9A1. That gives us 1 week to have
Lori Collins come
Lori
down
Collins
here.
come to the, see if Mr.
So will someone notify or let her know that this entire issue
hinges on
her shoulders? Mr. Nagani.
I must say, in all fairness to Ms. Collins, she had contacted Mr. Kraus and had mentioned that due to an unforeseen situation, she could not be here tonight. But she had contacted us, but she supported the Planning Commission's recommendation.
Okay. Mr. City Attorney.
Two things, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. One, if you are looking for testimony from others, in particular Ms. Collins, I would recommend you leave the public hearing open to receive that testimony next week. And second of all, following up on Mr. Starber's comment, the ordinance before you does take a 4/5 vote, and you noted that you could count, and that may or may not change between now and next week. However, an ordinance which addresses the process issue of where a use variance would go, zoning administrator, or instead of in lieu of the zoning administrator, to the BZA/Planning Commission, that would require a 3/5 vote. 3 affirmative votes.
Could that motion be made, or can I introduce a modified ordinance?
No. We can bring you...
So if we don't have the vote on that, then we can vote on the other one.
In other words, could Mr. Yusefian bring forward a motion at this time dealing with just the process?
To essentially bring forward an amended ordinance, because the language is already in here in part.
Right.
In part, so it essentially introduce an ordinance that's amended to reflect that use variances in all zones go before the BZA. Until we formally, and that's coming to you in a number of weeks, change BZA to Planning Commission, the interim ordinance will take care of that. So we still use the phrase Board of Zoning Appeals.
Do we have to bring this back to modify that when that one is eliminated?
No. That'll end it.
Okay.
Mr. Yusefian, did you get your question answered?
Yes, which the answer is yes, I can go ahead and introduce an ordinance. So I would like to also introduce a modified ordinance that keeps all the language on the process.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
You don't need it. It's just introduction.
Okay. I would like to...
Back two ordinances, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you. I would like to just comment, though. The reason why I would, if we were to talk about bringing that forward now, I would say no, personally. I mean, that would be my purpose. I would like to wait and see what transpires when this comes back in the intervening week. Councilmember Najarian has said that he, as we all are, trying to keep an open mind on this, and so we don't know what, if we do hear from other individuals that may be able to answer some of his concerns. You never know.
Certainly ask your colleague, Mr. Mayor, if he wants to withdraw that until next week.
I like to have both of them because, I like to get it over with, one way or another.
The original ordinance will have...
If the original ordinance passes with 4 votes, then it's done. If it doesn't, then at least you have the other one.
May I ask a question regarding the ordinance?
Please, especially if it clarifies something. Absolutely, Mr. Najarian.
Okay, so my question is, what is the resistance to having the zoning administrator hear it, have one more person hear it, and then go to BZA? Is it the fee that's involved, the actual appeal process?
No, it's the perception. It's the perception that one person is making substantial decision that affects the community, and they feel that it should go to more than one person. One person should not be the czar of making this type of decisions.
Okay.
That's all.
Thank you.
You still have the appeals and your stuff.
All right. I thank you all. I thank you all, and I thank the public for this. Let us move on.
You ready?
No. We don't have. No. We have oral communications.
Do we have new agenda items?
We have oral communication.
Oh, yeah, I forgot all that.
Where are we, Mr.?
We're at oral communications.
Thank you.
And discussion is limited time is not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Council may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision, and the city manager may refer the matter to the appropriate department for an investigation and a report.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll go to the public. Our first speaker is Steve Pierce, followed by Barry Allen.
Mayor Draymond and Council, first of all, I know this has been discussed earlier today, or this evening, but we are honored to have the 5 members of this council join us for the Montrose Christmas Parade this Saturday. It's going to be a great event. It's going to be televised live by Charter Communications. Thank you, Councilman Weaver, for helping out on that one as well. And we do appreciate the fact that the City of Glendale continually supports this event. This is the 32nd annual event, and it's going to be huge. We have about 150 plus entries, and I was given the direction to keep this under 100, and so I did quite a good job of that, I guess. But anyways, we have 13 bands. It's going to be an exciting night. Check the weather out. The weather's going to be great. We're just really looking forward to it, but I am just so honored that all 5 members of this council are going to be represented there, and we're looking forward to having your participation. So again, it starts 6:10 as the parade start. We started off with the flyover with the helicopter and Santa waving to us, and we anticipate approximately 15,000 plus people that will be lining the streets of Montrose. And they come from all over. I've had calls today from as far out as Highland Park and El Monte, and talking about the parade and what time it starts and how do you get there and so forth. So not only is this a community parade for the city of Glendale and for Montrose, but this really is a parade for Southern California as well. And this is all about Glendale that night. So thank you so very much, and we're looking forward to a great event on Saturday. Appreciate it.
Okay.
It's going to be fun after SC beats UCLA. It'll be a nice celebration party.
Yes, well.
Thank you, sir.
Do you have something to say about that, Mr. Kasakian? About the beating UCLA part, that is.
No, where do I even begin? It's all right. Steve Zarin and I always look at each other and commiserate during Councilmember Weaver's comments.
Thank you, Mr. Pierce.
All 5 of us going to be on one car?
No.
In one car?
Yeah, we're all on one float, one giant, really messy, difficult.
It'll be float. We could have a mock city council sitting on there.
Lookalikes, how's that? All right, I'm sorry, Mr. Allen. It's your turn.
Oh, it's always good to have some levity, especially here.
As if somebody says, if you don't laugh, you have to cry.
That's exactly right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council staff. I'm Barry Allen. And last week you asked about the magic box and applying to Americana. Actually, I talked to the Americana, and they said, we don't want the box, we don't want you, just bring the money. It's all we want is the money. I'm glad to see that our fire chief is here today. Maybe we can get an answer since August the 27th. It's the 7-minute slow roll in which a woman died in a fire. I know that quality of life, or maybe quality of death. The council and city manager take aim at members of the public that point out errors in reports as just being typos. L.A. Police Chief Bratton talks about the broken window theory that holds that people are more likely to commit crimes in neighborhoods that appear unwatched and uncared for by residents and local authorities. Criminals are emboldened by the lack of social control. Here we have a broken system where management and their bosses, those people on the dais, make excuses for mistakes. It must be very embarrassing to acknowledge these mistakes, especially when they're vetted and approved by the top managers in the city. Blame the vultures. Certainly don't blame yourselves for this continuing incompetence. Misclassification of expenditures. A firefighter budgeted to receive $486,000 and on and on. And by the way, there are those in the public who prefer not to be treated like mushrooms. And of course, we look at some of our council members who are like ostriches. They just hide. They hide the issues. They hide the facts. They don't want the public to see that. But remember, when you hide, what's showing? So the fact of the matter is, we want some accountability. And I think Mr. Yusefian did his best to steal my thunder. He may have been stealing my mail. I don't know about that. But campaign finance reform and aggressive solicitation ordinances speak to issues of getting money from vendors, yet the city, in response to a constitutionally protected Public Records Act request, has no idea how many consultants and contract workers they use, nor the amount of money they're being paid. Look up here to the faces of the dais. These are the people who are in charge of spending all of our money. And in action item 8D, they want you to guarantee that they'll continue to feed on our backs. Excuse me. I had made a public records request for information about the contract workers and consultants because those are issues that the public and, of course, the vetting authorities, the city clerk, city attorney, needs to know as to whether or not contributions being accepted fall within certain time frames of those two ordinances. What I have done here for the council, these are copies of the remarks made and copies of the Public Records Act request and the information so provided by the city attorney's office. And I want the public to know that they can read more about this in the weekly Vanguard that will be out Friday night, and check also our website. Thank you. I'm Barry Allen.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Allen. I think, by the way, that box, that sliding box, would be great for to describe parking in some of, like the Orange Street garage.
We could try that.
Just the endless, yeah. Okay. Evelyn Hansen, followed by Richard Espiritu.
Hi, Evelyn Hansen, longtime resident of Glendale. Good evening, Mayor, Council.
Good evening.
Back on an old theme, my house and the ongoing harassment by neighborhood services. I got another letter from the city attorney's office. They cited some pretty bogus supposed violations. I'm supposed to call the city attorney's office tomorrow and schedule another inspection. I'll do that, and I'll be back next Tuesday during announcements to let everybody know when the inspection is. I would like very much for people to come to the inspection to see exactly how they might be prosecuted or persecuted in the future. And afterwards, we'll pick avocados off my trees. Everybody would love, I'm sure, to have avocados, and it's that time of year, and I've got 4 trees to give away from. Thank you. Yep, you're invited.
Dare we ask what kind of avocados?
Fuetes.
Oh, good, very good, okay.
I've been told I should sell them for $3 a piece.
All right, all right. Richard Espiritu, followed by Joe Scopaccia. Yeah.
Scopacassa.
Easy for you to say.
I am Richard Espiritu. 2 weeks ago, Councilman Najarian was very upset because the city of Glendale did not receive the Business Friendly Award. With luck, I've nominated the city of Glendale, and with luck, they will receive the award for the most unfriendly ADA city in the United States. With that, I want to talk about a gorilla. Gorilla has an arm span roughly 12 inches longer than a human being, from armpit to finger. On the corner of Pacific and Riverdale, there is a new curb cut that does not have any wings, has a straight ramp. It's also from, if you're in a wheelchair, to touch the crossing light, 48 inches. Even Mr. Kasakian in a wheelchair could not touch it. There are 15 other crossings in the city of Glendale that have 48 or longer reaches in the city of Glendale with a similar type of crossings. This is worse than the city of Riverside, who got fined $200,000 for improper curb cuts. I'd also like to talk about English language proficiency. I'll be giving everybody a copy of the Glendale Water and Power Agreement in English, because there's not one in Spanish or Armenian. that makes you commit to certain payments. Also, here, it also talks about credit checks and delinquent payments, cutoffs, all kinds of good stuff. My question is, why isn't this in Armenian, Spanish, and Korean? When I talked to the Glendale Water and Power Department, they says, we don't have it, and it's not even online. The other issue that I'd also like to talk about is a form. This, by the way, the Department of Water and Power is an official form. I'd like to talk about another official form, which is from the Glendale Police Department, which deals with the grievance complaint. They do not have it in Armenian. They do have it in Armenian. And on the Armenian form, there are 6 typographical or word errors. Now, I don't speak Armenian. I had to talk to some Armenian friends. And after they gave me that, I took it over to the Glendale College, and they agreed that there are 6 errors. Typographical, maybe adding or subtracting of letters, I don't know, but somebody should have checked this. The Spanish one is almost as bad as the English, as bad as the Spanish one, but I would like Mr. Howard and the members of the City Council to have copies of this. Mr. Kasakian?
Nice reach, Art.
The issue here is English language proficiency comes under section Executive Order 13166, which I understand Mr. Nigerian wasn't sure what power an executive order has over the city of Glendale, and also under the Dalmani-Aleatory Bilingual Service Act of the state of California, which Mr. Howard wasn't too familiar with. But I'm sure someone will be able to look at this stuff and take a look and give me a reason why these things occur.
I have to ask this question, I'm sorry. Mr. Spiritu, I know you didn't mean that, but I think the way it came across, it sounded as if you were based on the reach of the gorilla and then saying that Mr. Kasakian couldn't even reach that. I hope you weren't meaning that about him.
No, I'm not calling him a gorilla.
Thank you.
Definitely I'm not calling him a gorilla.
A very handsome person who had a difficulty reaching.
All right, let's move on.
All right, our next speaker, Joe.
That's how it came across.
Scopacci. Could you pronounce your last name for me, sir?
Scopa casa.
Means clean house in Italian.
It means sweep the house.
I
never had any problem with it.
I just want to point out that you're missing a letter here.
Scopa casa.
Okay. There's a missing vowel, but that's... How do you spell that, just out of curiosity?
How do I spell it? S-C-O-P-A-C-A-S-A.
Okay, that's what's wrong. There's an A missing here on your form.
Oh, my gosh.
That's what I couldn't figure out where
Mr. Mayor?
the extra vowel is coming from on here. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, staff, friends. I'd like to make a suggestion. I've been here over 3 hours now, and I've been listening to Mr. Allen 4 times, Mr. Milano 3 times, Dr. DeSpirit about 3 times. I only want to speak for about 3 minutes. Why can't I speak at the beginning when you say you want to talk to anything other than agenda items? I can say 3 minutes, and then I'm either, if I have to go somewhere, I get out of here. I've been waiting all this time. Anyway, I've been in Glendale for 23 years. I own a couple condos here, the one I live in and the one in Forest Lawn. They're not for sale. They're not going to be repossessed or foreclosed or anything, but they're paid for.
They never declared that.
And the reason I'm here, actually, I love the city of Glendale. I love the police department. I love the fire department. And I love the city staff. Stubborn staring at me. And I think I care about you people, too. I love the Americana. I think the Americana is the best thing that's happened in Glendale for 100 years. Believe me. I haven't heard anybody say anything against it. Margaret Hammond, maybe. I don't know where she is tonight, but...
At Americana.
Yeah, maybe. Anyway, I go through there, and I feel a lot younger than I am. I go south of Colorado, I feel like an old man already again. It's because of the trash in those streets down there. I don't know if you have walked out. You behind the Oceanoia and where the Mandarin Hotel used to be, or the restaurant. Trash every single day. I go for my walk through there. That's why I know it. Anyway, we made a comment about the tree lighting ceremony and the fireworks on the 15th of November. I wasn't here last week because I went to Portland, Oregon to eat turkey and drink wine. I have a couple of bros up there. Anyway, otherwise I would have been here last Tuesday. And the reason I'm here, I heard some comments that you guys, I'm not mentioning any names, but somebody said that we shouldn't have the lighting ceremony, we shouldn't have the fireworks at the Americana. What? Why not? 30,000 people showed up and they enjoyed it. I was there, I enjoyed the whole thing. I was there at 5 o'clock and I left at 10:30, whatever, whenever it was over. I think everybody enjoyed it, especially the children. Somebody said the children don't like fireworks because boom, boom, boom. Little kid, 2, 3-year-old, but the rest of them, they enjoy it. So I don't see what the problem is. We should commend Mr. Rick Caruso instead of criticize him. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Herbert Milano, followed by Laura Moore.
Herbert's gone.
Okay, Laura Moore.
New face.
Followed by Michael Tian.
My name's Laura Moore. I live at 1449 El Miradero. I'll just lay it out right now. I came here tonight because I'm mad. Well, I've had 2 hours to cool off a little bit, so not quite as mad as when I got here. The reason I came here is I've been working for over a year trying to do a house improvement project in the city of Glendale. We have applied for a variance, and an administrative exception was, as you all know, is a pretty difficult process. And when I got home tonight, I got a notice that was sent to everyone within 300 feet of my house, which has errors on it, and errors that affect the people's perception of this project, that misstate what we're proposing. And I'm really mad about that. So I just wanted to come here and say, I want this corrected immediately. It misstates what we're asking for. Second,
What is it?
Well, it references...
Ms. Moore, finish your train of thought. We'll get you some
Right. The second thing is somewhat relevant to the discussions on the variances and the conditional use permits and things. I've applied for a variance, not a variance, an administrative exception to build a garage without the 25-foot radius in front. I applied to the zoning administrator, and it was denied because the zoning administrator said it's not accessible, therefore the second space in the garage would be unusable. A traffic engineer, a licensed professional engineer in the state of California can show that it's accessible. No one from the zoning administrator's office walked across the hallway to the traffic department within the city of Glendale who might have consulted on this and looked at it and realized it. But I followed the process, and I had to pay $700 because the zoning administrator, I don't think it's a matter of an opinion. I think it's a technical evaluation that wasn't done properly. I'm following the process. So what I'm asking for tonight is, please correct this immediately. I'd like an apology because it affects how we can get our neighbors to understand the project if this is in error. And secondly, well, I would just, if I were to send out something unchecked and incorrect in my work, it wouldn't be acceptable. I'm a consultant. A consultant would be not paid for this work. That's all I have to say.
All right, Ms. Moore, let's get started with seeing if we can find some assistance for you. Let's make sure we get the information, the name, the contact, and
I still like to know what the error was.
And
Error was.
Ms. Moore, you'd have to come to the mic.
We are asking the variance we're requesting is to build a .35 FAR in a .30 zone, and the reference there talks about .40, which is significantly more than what we're asking for. And so I think it's inflammatory. When I'm trying to explain to the neighbors what we're talking about, when it comes out and they see that it's .40 instead of .35, there's a big difference there in what we're asking for. The second thing is related to the administrative exception. The wording there links it to the variance, which it's not. It's independent, and that is also misleading. And we've been having trouble getting satisfactory and timely responses.
All right, let's see if we can get you some assistance with this. And Mr. Hagani, however this works itself out, could you bring us some kind of an update by, not necessarily council, but by memo?
Will do.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Ms. Moore. Our next speaker is Michael Tehan.
Mayor Draymond, City Council, and staff, my name is Michael Tehan. I'm a resident of Glendale. I will be very brief. Hillside ordinance. Please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tehan.
That was it?
Said ordinance. Okay, that is our last speaker card. Mr. Yusefian, let's start with you.
I talked to our city manager, and I would like to ask our chief of police to come and answer. Sorry, the fire chief. Oh, is that a promotion? Does he get more money? No. Our fire chief to answer the question that has been asked by Mr. Allen time and time again over the 7-minute issue. Could you please let us know what were the circumstances? Because if we don't answer it, people think that we did something wrong and we're trying to avoid it. And I think you have answered to us, but I think the public needs to hear that.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Yusefian. Our response time to the fire at 336 Lorraine was not a 7-minute response time. I'm not really sure what information Mr. Allen is referring to. He has done a public records request for many records in the fire department, but the information he's presenting here to the public, it's inaccurate. When this incident first occurred, and Mr. Allen had set some information out in the back of the room that was very inaccurate, and I had talked to him about it. I thought it was very inappropriate for him to address that where a person lost their life in a fire. It wasn't a very significant fire, but someone did lose their life, and for him to put that information out there was just totally insensitive to the family. Our first responders got on scene in 4 minutes and 52 seconds from Fire Station 26 at 2:07 in the morning. There were some complications getting to the scene. If you've ever been on Lorraine between Valley View and Columbus, the street was blocked. It's our practice to get the ladder truck in there first in case they need to put the aerial up or ladder the building and things like that. So the ladder truck, truck 26, was the first unit on scene. They got there in 4 minutes and 52 seconds after navigating around cars that were blocking the street. The second in company was Engine 26, and they were not there in 7 minutes. They were there in just over 6 minutes, but they were behind the ladder truck, and they had to let them pull into position. When our units did get on scene, they quickly deployed a hand line, started attacking the fire from the exterior window. 2 of our firefighters went inside the structure, started a search, and found a body on the side of the bed. They extricated the victim out of the window. It was a very rapid response for all the things that were going on at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's just sad to see when a person has the accurate information, that they come up here week after week and present inaccurate information to the community, as well as sitting out information in the back of the room on the incident and comparing it to another incident that it should not be compared to. And the information he sat out in the back of the room weeks ago, it had companies assigned to the wrong station. It had all kinds of errors on it. So for an individual who comes up here week after week and attacks the accuracy of the information that's presented, it's sad to see that he presents this information to the council and to the community. Our firefighters work hard, and our firefighters took this very hard. I don't know if any of you have ever seen a person in this condition being extricated from a building and starting life-saving measures and had to pronounce her at the scene. It's a traumatic experience. When I got the call, my first response was to go to the scene where our firefighters were still on scene of that incident. So it's sad to see that, someone, you can't try to talk to them and give them the accurate information because it's not what they want to hear. And no matter how hard we try or what angle we go at, he'll present inaccurate information. So I'm telling you, I have the dispatch reports, if you'd like to see them. This speaks to the facts of what time our units got there, what time the fire was knocked down, and all the different things associated with the incident. So, more than happy to answer any questions you may have about that incident.
All right, let's try to keep it.
Chief, did you provide those information to Mr. Allen?
Mr. Allen did a public records request, and we provided him with what he asked for.
Did you provide him that particular document that you were...
I'm not 100% sure with what we provided him for. Normally, what Mr. Allen asked for is a copy of the station's logbooks.
Is that public document?
This is our Verdugo dispatch log.
Is
Yes.
that allowed to the public?
Yes.
Could you make 5 copies for us?
Yes.
And also provide a copy to him? And I'm sorry to put you through the trauma, but I thought it was important for you to clear that item up, because since this incident has happened, that question has been asked almost every session, so I thought at one point it was important for me to ask you to clear that up.
And Councilman Yousefian, please understand, it's not putting me through the trauma. I value what our firefighters do. It's putting our firefighters who did that rescue that night through the trauma of questioning their actions. It's saying that they didn't work as hard as they could to save a person's life. That's what it's saying. So that's who it's putting through the trauma. I'm more than happy to come here and speak to you tonight on behalf of our firefighters here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Chief. All right, any other comments or questions?
Will we adjourn?
Second.
You're adjourned.